Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Gennady Stolyarov II. I am the chairman of the United States Transhumanist Party. Welcome to our first virtual debate among the candidates of the United States Transhumanist Party for the office of President of the United States. We are pleased to welcome three primary candidates today, two of whom are currently on the stream. We have Johannon Ben Zion and Rachel Haywire, and soon to be joining us will be Charles Holsopple. The format of this debate will be as follows. We will broadcast for approximately 2 hours, though this is a flexible time limit. Each candidate will have the same amount of time per segment to provide their remarks. However, we're not going to have a strict cutoff for any candidate. Instead, we're going to have a system where if the candidate exceeds his or her allotted time, we will simply subtract that time from the final remarks. And if the candidate does not use the entirety of his or her time, that time will be added to the final remarks. We will attempt to be as equitable as possible among the candidates. And furthermore, during each candidate's allotted time, that candidate will be the one speaking. So unlike in some other parties' debates, we will not have interruptions from other candidates. Instead, each candidate will be able to convey his or her message. So with this, I am going to serve as the moderator today. So all of the substantive comments will be provided by our candidates. First, the candidates will each introduce themselves for 5 minutes, and then we will delve into the three core ideals of the United States Transhumanist Party. And each candidate will devote 5 minutes to each of the core ideals. At that point, each candidate will have the opportunity to provide miscellaneous remarks or rebuttals for 3 minutes per person. And then we will venture on to the viewer questions. And we already have some interesting viewer questions in the chat. We will attempt to get to as many of them as we can. And within each question, we are going to give our candidates 2 minutes to provide a response. And after that, at the end, each candidate will be given 2 minutes to provide a closing statement, and that's when any of the carryover time will be utilized as well. So with that, thank you everyone for attending this historic debate. We are going to begin with candidate Johannon Ben Zion.
Please call me Ben.
Candidate Ben providing his introductory remarks. Candidate Ben, the floor is yours.
Excellent, excellent. So if you're not familiar with my campaign, I am representing the Futurist New Deal, and I need to tell you a little bit about that. And now, I have very long enjoyed the social criticism and very much the wit and wisdom of a gentleman named Chris Hedges. He's known to some people as the American Empire's prophet of doom. Now, I feel it's good to pay attention to criticisms of all manner of systems, even if you don't look to every part of them as gospel truth, and that's the way that I've enjoyed Mr. Hedges. So even though I am myself a cockeyed techno-optimist, I admit sometimes that not too many days will pass before I look at the news and I think, ooh, crikey, America is kind of boned. That's what I want to talk to you about in the context of the Futurist New Deal. You need the Futurist New Deal more than you realize. Speaking more broadly, there are few affairs in the world of humankind that could be said to function absolutely perfectly. So many institutions will have a slapdash quality in the way that the loveliest cities in the world are often ones that were built over periods of centuries rather than planned for or engineered. And of the institutions more broadly, the cultural, political, and all of them economic institutions, we could look at them in a certain sense as works in progress, rather than great engineering marvels. The United States, perhaps, over the years has gained a reputation for being a place where this is very true, even doubly so. So whereas the undertakings of other stable nation states may generally be perceived as succeeding on their own merits, the United States is perceived to be a place where things are sometimes dictated by oligarchic or imperialist forces. So the question I think we have to ask ourselves is, how do we make our systems less slapdash or problematic? And that is where the Futurist New Deal comes in. A Futurist New Deal has a number of points, just like the charter documents of the Arizona Transhumanist Party and the U.S. Transhumanist Party. There's an awful lot of information that we have, but I think we can boil it down to a few key points. The Futurist New Deal is a middle-class basic income funded by federal land leases, and we also advocate for full voter participation through a federally mandated a blockchain voting system, a technology for which it entirely exists, and I've talked about in a few of my podcasts, if you check out the Futurist New Deal podcasts on my page. And also we are advocating for a number of other reforms, including measures that would implement universal health care. Now, if you disbelieve that the United States is such a place plagued by these problems, ask your friends what they think about the prospect of a Civil War 2.0. And some of them might believe this, and whether they think that economic factors have anything to do with this set of concerns. Or read one of the hundreds and hundreds of articles written about anti-Americanism in the larger world. We may want to look at these things in a positive light, but not everyone does agree on these things. I don't like the way that the term deep state is used in the United States. It's bandied around and twisted. You're probably politically literate enough to realize that this refers to specifically centrally planned forms of government different from those in North America. But you would find it very difficult, I think, to dismiss the term U.S. deep state completely out of hand, just as you might have a hard time making a case to yourself or your friends that the United States does not have these oligarchic or imperialist tendencies. The Futurist New Deal was intended and was conceived of as an attempt to solve some of these problems, and also with an issue that I'll be talking about in my next speech, with radical life extension and super longevity in mind. It may, on its face, look like these things are not related, but we have a unique opportunity here to be moving our society in a direction through a series of reforms that would allow everyone to achieve a longer lifespan, and we need to capitalize on these opportunities, strengthen our middle class, which has suffered in recent decades because of reform policies, which in hindsight may be viewed as having harmed the middle class. We could say something like Reaganomics. How am I doing on time, Gennady?
Well, you are currently 24 minutes over the
24 seconds.
24 seconds,
okay.
Yes, over the 5-minute guideline. Sorry.
So please consider the Futurist New Deal and this reform ticket as you are making your decision to vote. Thank you.
All right, thank you. So that was 30 seconds over, and we will simply make a note of that. Candidate Haywire, please proceed with your introductory remarks.
Hi, let me know, give me like a 10-second warning when my time is almost up.
Very well.
I like Ben Zion's Futurist New Deal. I'm interested in what he said about imperialism and oligarchy. I think imperialism should be artistic. I think the way to stop imperialism is to create an imperialist kind of mind simulation so we can explore our imperialistic tendencies through virtual reality and augmented reality. That way we can explore these areas of thought through art without actually hurting anybody, through expanding visionary technology and funding the transgressive arts. We can explore these creative areas of self-expression through funding visionary tech. I think that this will stop these imperialistic tendencies that Ben Zion is referring to. That's one of the major things that I'm advocating for as a transhumanist candidate. Another thing that I'm advocating for is universal basic income. I believe that every American citizen should get $2,000 a month. The way that I want to do this is by cutting down our military budget. We're currently spending an obscene amount of money on overseas wars. I want to bring our troops home. I want to cut down spending on the surveillance state. I fully agree with Tulsi Gabbard. I want to end this Cold War that we have with Russia right now. I think it's absurd. Our real threat is the Chinese surveillance state. It's obscene. Their social credit system, it's absolutely obscene. As I said in my 4th of July speech, it's enough to make any producer of Black Mirror jealous, the way that they're surveilling their citizens. So I really want to stop this imperialistic global trade. So this is very important to me, to cut down on military spending, to cut down on the surveillance state, and really to get nonviolent drug offenders and sex workers out of prison. So we take that money, we relocate it to give every American citizen $2,000 a month, universal basic income, funding of the transgressive arts. And I believe that I would be a good candidate for president of the United States and for the Transhumanist Party for these reasons, in addition to my experience as a transhumanist organizer. When I was a lot younger, in 2011, I founded the Extreme Futures Festival. It was one of the first events of its kind, if not the first event. I brought people together from all classes, people from the goth industrial scene, people from the punk subcultures, with people from the high ends of the ivory towers, and people from the Silicon Valley elite. Aubrey de Grey was one of my headliners. I'm sure you guys are familiar with him. I brought him to speak with Ben Goertzel, who I'm sure you guys know. He played alongside Atari Teenage Riot head Hanin Elias, who was one of the founders of the cyberpunk musical movement. We had people like the band Negative Land, an early cyberpunk pioneer. We had Survival Research Laboratories, a performance art underground cult band in San Francisco. They created a pyrotechnics robotics show. We took over LA Center Studios. We had robots setting things on fire alongside life extension scientists, people talking about mind uploading. And I brought together all these different subcultural strata, all these different classes together to form kind of this new fusion of art and technology, of life extension and self-expression. And to this day, there are many festivals that have still been influenced by the work that I've done. And I want to continue on this pathway as a candidate. And this is all very important to me. As Andrew Breitbart said, politics is downstream from culture. And I want to continue doing this work as a candidate. And I hope that you guys will support me in my efforts.
All right. Thank you, candidate Haywire. And actually, you have 1 minute and 4 seconds remaining, which...
Oh, great. Does anybody have any questions from the audience? I'd be happy to answer if I get some extra time.
Well, I think we're going to have audience questions afterward.
Okay.
But if candidate Ben Zion has a question,
sure,
this may be an
Cool.
opportunity.
Go ahead.
I guess we could talk about comparing Andrew Yang's $12,000 UBI. Yours is, which is double that. Ours is a continuation of the founder and first presidential candidate Zoltan Istvan. He also funded a middle class UBI. Ours is a $52,000 payout.
Yes.
Do you have any points about the tax code or funding of these?
I do. I love Zoltan's plan. I love what you're doing. But at the same time, I don't think that the 1K that Andrew is proposing is enough. And to be clear, I'm not just advocating for the middle classes. I'm advocating for the D class A at the same time. There are a lot of freelancers in the gig economy, people that are unemployed, underemployed, displaced tech workers, people that are really struggling. And $1,000 a month isn't enough for these people. So I want to do $2,000 a month. I think we need a lot more than 1K. I know brilliant people that have some of the best ideas that I've ever heard in my entire life that are going through so much right now, whether it's extreme debt, homelessness. I'm talking people that used to be CEOs of tech companies that have influenced artificial intelligence startups now that are making billions, that are currently living in squats in Silicon Valley. And they need more than $1,000 a month. So Andrew is great with what he's doing, but 1K is not enough. So yeah, we need 2,000 a month. To definitely 2,000 a month. Yeah, 1,000. It's you can't live on that. Not in a big city. You can't live in New York City and in San Francisco and LA. I mean, you're lucky if you can live in Chicago or even New Orleans and with 1,000 a month. That's a joke, honestly. I mean, like, all respect to Andrew Yang for getting UBI off the ground, but you can't live on 1,000 a month. That's absurd, frankly.
No, indeed. Yes. Many of the please go ahead.
Yes, I will give you the opportunity to ask that question, candidate Ben Zion. I believe candidate Charles Holsopple has had some technical difficulties in getting in. So as a last resort, I am going to call him right now and make sure that he is able to join us.
Excitement's killing me.
Hello, Charles.
Yes, I'm trying to type that long thing in.
That sounds reasonable.
I'm looking at my phone. So
yes. So Charles, right now you are live. I had to call you as a workaround, and
great.
If you are able to simply introduce yourself over the phone, you have 5 minutes so that our audience is aware of what you stand for, your background, your qualifications. That way we can proceed with the debate even as you try to get in despite the technical difficulties, and hopefully we can keep assisting you offline as well. But I'm sure our audience wants to hear from you.
Well, great. Thank you, Gennady, and Johan and Rachel for being here and trying to put this together so we can change the world. And myself, Charles Holsopple is my name, and I'm the founder of Project 222, a human rights campaign. And it basically says that we are all better off if each of us have dignified access within civil society to a minimum of 2 gallons of clean water a day, 2,000 nutritional calories a day, and 200 cubic feet of secure shelter. So covering Maslow's hierarchy of needs and putting it into finite amounts so that we can actually break it apart bit by bit scientifically, technology and ethics and our resources, so that all people in the United States and ultimately around the world have dignified access to food, water, shelter. And I started that, well, let me go back. And when I was a young child, I learned a couple what it served me throughout my life. And they were at the grocery store and out by the mailbox before I was in school. And I learned at the grocery store that there were 2 water fountains, one white. Curiously, my father told me there was no difference in the water. And this was in the 1950s. And of course, that was segregation. So I learned that black and white are not always black and white, and absolute is a perspective for the most part. And there's always that little quantum quirk somewhere. And in this case, it was obvious that society was not treating this as the same. And then I learned about heaven and hell. And out by the mailbox, I'm talking to little Jenny Berman, and she tells me, well, we don't believe in Jesus. And I had heard that was the only way to get to heaven, and if you didn't go to heaven, you went to hell. And I was assured that she wasn't going to heaven, that I wasn't going to hell, and that all those little people that didn't know anything about, that didn't have the knowledge of what I was given the knowledge, they weren't going to hell either. So I learned that absolutes were not really adhered to, at least by society. And then I went, grew up, went in the Army, was a medic in the Army, and when I got out, I did carpentry and learned some trades and then I worked at a psychiatric unit at the VA hospital. And then I went into capitalism, and I bought and sold, bought low, sold high as often as possible, sold or traded around $300 million worth of product. And at that point, 52 years old, 2005, I said, there's got to be more to this. And I went on what I called a sabbatical and I was going to take a couple of years off. And I had been successful enough at capitalism that I could if I lived right and without excessiveness. And so I did that, and I worked with the University of Akron on a polymer science engineering, their polymer science engineering school, to come together with a rapidly deployable housing structure that could be used for permanent settlements. And not to get into detail on that, but the professors were very interested, and they said, hey, if you can get us funding, we think we can build what you're talking about. What I told them was this could revolutionize the housing industry. And they were excited, but way over my head to get funding and deal with all these different institutions, and everything was about funding. And so I went back to the drawing board because I realized it didn't, that when we built construct houses, an individual understanding, both intellectually and role that are to take care of ourselves and fit into a civil society. I'd rather have a silk sheet between a friend than a concrete wall between neighbors. So it wasn't necessarily about the structure. So I went to the drawing board and said, what question can I ask people to stimulate that empathetic and intellectual understanding of our shared existence? And that came up eventually with, are you better off has dignified access to food, water, and shelter? And I knew that to be true mathematically because we're all connected, and if one's running out of food, water, shelter, then the other one's in danger of it as well. So in 2018, January, I started the nonprofit project 222.org. And I put it out there and I said, I'm looking for the best and brightest mind, scientifically, politically, in any charge that you're in, to come together in a common mission to identify within the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals, get 222 recognized as indicators within those goals and commonly understood, so that we can really take a look at what's going on and what we need to do, how we need to use science and technology to transform the world into one of peace and prosperity. And so I put on LinkedIn, and I started, and that's when I found Newton Lee after a month or so of the Institute for Education, Research, and Scholarships, also the chairman of the California Transhumanist Party, as well as the author of the new book, The Transhumanist Handbook. And Newton was very encouraging, and the Institute for Education, Research, and Scholarships, his foundation, sponsored us as a 501c3 nonprofit. And then I shared with him how we could get transhumanism and 222 out into the public domain and into the conversation between political parties, whether it be Republican or Democrat or any other party. And that comes from my background during that time. I'm running out of my 5 minutes, I would assume, but during the Occupy movement, when I was there in 2011, 3 or 4 months in a tent in front of the White House, and meeting all kinds of cutting edge, I don't want to say protesters as much as demonstrators, but that brought me to come up with the 200 cubic feet, actually, because of the size of the tent that I was in. The size of the little anti-nuclear vigil right in front of the White House is about 200 cubic feet. So, so I went on. We got sponsored by the Institute, and then Newton asked me. He says, Charles, the values of 222 and the Institute for Education Research and Scholarships and the Transhumanist Party are directly in line, and you should run for president of the United States because that's what's coming up. And that was about 2 months ago. So I'd heard of the Transhumanist Party. Once I looked at it, I agreed with Newton and said, you're right. And if I'm going to promote peace on earth, hooking up with the Transhumanist Party and driving their values and identifying with the scientists that are primarily, that's what it's composed of, from what I can tell. And then everybody wins, particularly those without 222. So that's the nutshell.
Thank you very much, Candidate Holsopple. We appreciate your introductory remarks, and we are going to try to assist you in getting onto the live stream. I will continue my correspondence with you via email. In the meantime, we can proceed with our segment on the first core ideal of the United States Transhumanist Party, which is that the Transhumanist Party supports significant life extension achieved through the progress of science and technology. And we will ask each candidate to speak for 5 minutes about how their platforms and aspirations align with this first core ideal. Candidate Ben Zion, I believe that you have the floor now. So just a moment, if I may. Candidate Ben Zion, I have tried to unmute you. Can you speak? Unfortunately, I cannot hear you. Let's see, present. All right, Candidate Ben Zion, we are having technical issues. I had muted you before, but now I want to unmute you, and I'm unable to do that. We will continue to correspond. I cannot hear you, I'm afraid. Let's see. Let us go to Candidate Haywire for now, while I work with Candidate Ben Zion.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. It looks like Ben's mic is muted from my end. So maybe he just needs to unmute it. Maybe
no, I have muted it, but I don't have the ability to unmute it. Yes. I think what I can do is I've requested Candidate Ben Zion to send me his phone number as well. And
okay, well, maybe if we have like somebody that can come in and help us troubleshoot, do you have maybe like somebody that can assist with all of this?
Yes, Candidate Ben Zion asked if he should leave and come back. Yes, try that.
Okay, well, I'm happy to just go ahead and talk for now. So we're going on to the core ideal number 1, life extension, 5 minutes, correct?
Yes, that is correct.
Okay, so one of the big things that I'm advocating for is legal protection for cryonics patients. And it's very important to me that all humans have access to life extension technology. A lot of people, they cannot afford cryonics right now. There are very expensive programs right now. One of the main life extension institutions right now, Alcor, has very expensive options. And people often, they say life extension is a club for the rich. And, you know, sometimes it really does seem that way with the rates that Alcor has. There are more affordable options like the Cryonics Institute and TransTime. But I think like some people, they really just can't afford cryonics in general, but everybody should be able to afford cryonics because it's an incredible technology and the possibilities are very, very exciting to me. So what I'm thinking is, all humans should be able to have access to life extension technology. So what I would like to see, two things: life extension for all human beings, which would involve subsidizing cryonics, number one, and number two, legal protection for cryonics patients, which would involve a legal program that would enable all cryonics patients to have legal protection for their suspension. So that means, say that there's somebody that wants to get suspended that might not have the money immediately to have the cryonics process that they desire. They would be able to put down a plan that would give them that opportunity later, even if it's something as simple as paying $20 a month, something like paying in cryptocurrency. Say that they have a bunch of Ethereum. Say that they have even something like Dogecoin. They could pay for cryonics in Dogecoin. With the blockchain rapidly developing, I want to see new options for cryonics expand. I want to see new opportunities for cryonics develop. I want to see new opportunities for life extension develop. So what I want to see is an expansion of life extension that reaches out to all sectors of the population. And I fully advocate for all humans to have access to life extension technology. Additionally, there have been some very recent tragic instances in the cryonics community. I'm sure that you guys know about Danielle Baker. I have a personal friend who was very close to her. These tragic instances, they have to stop. There needs to be a way to stop these things from occurring. There needs to be some kind of legal remedy to make sure that people in the transhumanist community do not have suspensions that occur in these manners. What happened to Danielle? She didn't get the suspension that she desired. She didn't get suspended at all. And then there was the guy at Alcor, the Lawrence guy, with the head, the cremated remains. I don't want to get into the whole thing. But what we need is to improve the cryonics industry. We need all cryonics patients to have better protections in general. And what I would do, and this is another part of my platform, is create public education on transhumanism. I would begin by going to the classrooms, finding professors, some who are personally friends of mine. A guy named James Miller comes to mind. He's a transhumanist who also teaches at Smith College, I believe. He's been in our community for a while. And I would have people like him. Robin Hansen is another friend of mine who also comes to mind. He's a transhumanist who is also a cryonicist. And I would have him give talks about cryonics, and have people in our community that are also life extension advocates give talks about cryonics to the general public. Let them know about life extension. Let them know that it's more than a sci-fi fantasy. Let them know that cryonics is being funded, that we do have people in our community that are making cryonics a reality, that it's more than some Austin Powers sci-fi film, that we're currently working to build it. Now, if the public knows that cryonics is not just some head in the clouds dream, that we are currently making it happen, then we can begin making it accessible to the public. So what really matters is that we make life extension publicly accessible, publicly available, that we demystify it, that we decoopify it. Cryonics is not kooky. It's not crazy. Cryonics is not just some weird science fiction fable. Cryonics is what we're doing right now, and it should be available to everybody. Life extension should be available to everybody. And I even want to go as far as saying that there is more to life extension than cryonics. There is also mind offloading. There is also rejuvenation. There is also regenerative medicine. I've heard cases about people that have had their limbs regenerated. I've even heard people that were blind that had their sight restored, people that were nearing death that had their limbs regenerated. So we have regenerating limbs, where we're really on the cusp of literal transhumanism, where we're actually, quote unquote, becoming the Ubermensch right now. We're in a transcendental state where our lives are extending and we are becoming more than human for the first time. We are on the frontier of creating a new species. That's us. We are the transhumanist generation. We are the pioneers of the life extension movement. That's what is one of the things that unites us as a community. I fully advocate for it. And we do need to take it out of the ivory towers by creating public education on it. So that's going far beyond just having these think tanks discussing it. That means going to punk shows and having professors give these talks at punk events, going to goth clubs and having PhDs give speeches at goth clubs about life extension before bands play. We need to really think outside of the box. At one of my events, the Extreme Futurist Festival, there was a game designer who was also a musician who was teaching people how to code. And he was teaching people how to code through a game that he designed. It was called Code Hero. And he was also working on industrial music at the same time. Now, these are the kinds of fusions that we need to really cross the barrier, to make life extension and transhumanist technology available to the public. Because somebody that might just be a fan of music might suddenly become aware of life extension through going to these events and becoming aware of the technologies available when they were previously just a fan of the music scene. That's the way we make life extension to the public. We create options where people can afford life extension treatment. We make life extension popular. We make transhumanism popular again. We make life extension popular, not again, but for the first time. But we make transhumanism great again for the first time.
All right. Thank you, Candidate Haywire, for your remarks. And in light of the unfortunate microphone malfunction last time, we are going to give Candidate Ben Zion unlimited time for his remarks for this.
All right.
I think it's only fair. And Candidate Holsopple is still on the phone with us. I've advised him of another possibility to attempt to log into the live stream. But first, we will have Candidate Ben Zion.
Excellent. So I think there's maybe a distinction that could be drawn here, and I'll give a shout out to also one of our people in chat, Pavel. Pavel says, "What about life extension for people who are still alive?" And this is my feeling as well. Cryonics is kind of a little bit more in the realm of resurrectionism than radical life extension. Radical life extension is something that we want to advocate for the living people, the 340 million people in this country. We want all of them to ultimately be able to benefit from that before they have to have their heads removed and frozen. That's a measure of last resort. You know, I spoke to Natasha Feitemore briefly yesterday, and I'm an incredible supporter of Alcor. I think it's a great business model, and I think that people should consider subscribing to this. People who follow my podcast know that I can't go for 5 minutes without talking about Peter Thiel. And I know that Peter Thiel is a user of Alcor, but I think that he would probably agree that this is a measure of last resort, that he might prefer to pursue other radical life extension channels, some of the ones that he's funding, for example, and that are being increasingly funded by people in our community. These as these things are becoming more realistic prospects, people are spending more money on them, and this is a network effect in and of itself. I was talking to the vice chair of the Arizona Transhumanist Party, and we were talking about super longevity in personal terms, the people that we've lost. Some of us have lost people quite recently. This is a horrible thing for us to have to go through. We can increasingly be moving towards a framework where this is no longer the case, where death is something that it's incremental. We have, as we are approaching a longevity escape velocity, we will be able to take more and more steps. We'll have a longer amount of time to address future interventions and preventative measures. But we certainly are moving in that direction. And it's important, I think, to again stress that the Futurist New Deal creates an environment that is highly conducive to getting those 340 million people to survive to a universal longevity escape velocity. The $52,000 payout, which is quadruple or double the other candidates' payouts, will allow for people to have that much more ability to be well, to take care of their families, to plan, and for their own health, and the preventative measures that will allow them to achieve super longevity. I will also talk about something that perhaps a little bit more speculative in our community as it relates to radical life extension. In the 1970s, there was a woman named Louise Brown who was about to be born. She's better known as the first test tube baby. And this first test tube baby, there was a lot of excitement, even verging on a moral panic across the United States about what the condition of this child would be. Would she be a healthy child? Would this new form of fertility medicine prove to be a safe one? And there were a lot of people who were very socially conservative who were concerned about this. And then some months later, after 9 months of total gestation, this child was born, and lo and behold, it was a healthy child. And a great move was made towards accepting this new field of fertility medicine. The American people were no longer afraid of this; they accepted it. And I think we can say kind of the same thing about radical life extension today. It's very hard to look at radical life extension from an analytical perspective and see a downside to super longevity. But some people who are alarmist may have concerns of these kind. And I think as we are able to assuage those concerns, we will do a great service to our community. And this is why I challenge people to not avoid those conversations with those people who have those fears, but rather to engage them fully, to engage their friends, to advance this conversation. Because if we're able to create that kind of level of excitement around radical life extension that was around the birth of Louise Brown, I think that we could do more than any Elon Musk's or Peter Thiel's could do to advance that conversation. So I hope that you will consider that the Futurist New Deal is in fact a bridge to the steps that unite this entire community. It's, I think, the one thing that unites us more than anything as techno-optimists is our interest in radical life extension. And the Futurist New Deal was designed to bring that message to people who maybe are not familiar with concepts of super longevity and the great developments that have been made in terms of scientists and scientific breakthroughs in that area. Thank you, Gennady, for giving me this additional time, and I will turn it back to you.
Absolutely. Thank you, Candidate Ben Zion, for your remarks. We still have Candidate Holsopple on the phone. Is that correct?
Yes, I'm back.
Excellent. Yes, so I have you on a slightly different phone interface right now. We will still try to get a way to get into contact with you visually, but in the meantime, you have the floor to speak about the U.S. Transhumanist Party's first core ideal on the support of significant life extension achieved through the progress of science and technology. Please proceed with your remarks.
Thank you. And yeah, I won't disagree with either Rachel or Ben, because it's not my area, but it is something that I'm vaguely familiar with, is the use of the cyborgs and the very high-end technical aspects of extending radical life extension. My core, though, goes back to significant life extension. and it starts at birth. I'm not just looking for the old guys like me. I'm looking out for those that are born into this world that are not born into an equal set of resources and technologies and science that never reaches them. So we have about 20 million people in the U.S. that are inadequately housed without dignified access to food, water, and shelter on a secure basis. And I would say that there are hundreds of millions of people in the U.S. that are concerned about those three things every day. In fact, I think we're all concerned in some fashion about whether or not we have food, water, and shelter. So in order to significantly extend the life of all of us on the planet, I think we need a unifying message that goes beyond the Transhumanist Party, that includes and welcomes those in. My campaign slogan, one of them, is "Welcome to the Party," because I think we need to broaden the Transhumanist Party to people like me that weren't really familiar with it even months ago. I remember when Zoltan did just vaguely, that he had a truck and he traveled to different parts of the country in 2016 to get this word out. And that, and we owe a debt of gratitude to Gennady I expect you, Gennady, for putting this one together, but for Zoltan to get the party started. And now it's time for us to bring people into the party so that those basic needs can be met with joint benefit to those, but also to help usher in those aspects of the party that are they're central to the transhumanist seniors, those that have been around it a while. But the general public, they don't care about what happens to them after 2, 3, 4 decades from now. They're looking at how are those existential threats to ideal number 3, how are they being met today? Because they are actually without the security of that food, water, shelter. And I believe the U.S. government should have a policy that is a safety net for those without the basic needs, that is shortening their lifespan and degrading the quality of their life because they don't have dignified access to a minimum of 222. So I would like the Transhumanist Party to be the rally point of that basic human right, and have the Republicans ultimately put on their platform, if we can get 222 into the common conversation, and I have a plan for that. If we can get to political sporting events, anywhere where someone's carrying a sign, if the 222 message is as widespread as it needs to be, we can assist that with putting 222 on any political sign, standing behind a political candidate, whether it be Donald Trump or Bernie Sanders or Elizabeth Warren. But if you have a sign that says Elizabeth Warren 222, if that's who you're backing, it becomes a conversation. And the only way that we're going to have a transformation of our society from the tribalism that we have now, whether it be political tribalism or corporate interests that are dedicated and their whole value system is on one technology that is potentially antiquated, like the fossil fuel industry, those interests are very powerful, and they won't allow these technologies to flourish until they have an economic control of them, which I would like to extend an olive branch to all of the people that are in power now that are actually causing more damage to the population's dignified access to food, water, and shelter, the environment, whether it be the water or the air or our food supply. We need to enlist those with power that are very much removed from we're talking about the 1/10 to 1%. Those few families that are super wealthy, and they really dictate much of what is offered to the everyday man, certainly to me, in many forms. And they perpetuate, again, antiquated technologies. So we want to invite them in. We want to make them heroes. In many cases, they're hiding behind the let's just call it selfishness of the past, or they're kind of trapped into it. They've inherited these major corporations that are causing damage to the environment and to the fabric of society. We need to make them heroes. I like to say, if they have a 420-foot yacht and they can only go into 70% of the harbors in the world, and in those harbors they can only venture out a certain way until they find themselves unsafe and certainly a place that they don't want to be. They want their comforts. I'd say we give them an opportunity to be heroes so they can donate that 420-foot yacht, make it into a community resource center, and buy their 600-foot yacht and park it out and move into any port welcome as heroes, because they help transform society. This major transformation that we need in order to come together as people in the United States and across the world to deal with the real threats that we have, that none of us are going to live very long if we don't take care of the societal issues and the environmental issues that we face today. So to radically extend life, again, I welcome the factions that are after personal radical life extension. I certainly don't have any issues with that, as the ideals say, as long as it does not infringe on the rights of others. I'd be all in favor of it. But I think it's much more urgent and much more necessary that we face the inequities that people face today, from some from birth, and many of us in old age that don't have dignified access to food, water, shelter based on our economic or social economic or our geographic location. So that's my opinion on extending life, is that we have 7 billion people, and if we make an issue to use those indicators within UNESCO, within USAID, within all of our philanthropic dollars, if we use the 2 gallons of water, 2,000 calories, and 200 cubic feet as common integers in what it takes to bring our aid, if those are indicators within the Sustainable Development Goals and other efforts, we can improve the efficiency, identify corruption, and bring help to those most in need.
Thank you, Candidate Holsopple, for your remarks. Now, before we move on to our next segment, I would like to reset a few matters because of our technical issues. I think it would be fair to simply call it a clean slate on time and designate a new speaking order. So I'm going to use my random integer generator on my TI-83 Plus calculator, and previously Rachel had selected, Candidate Haywire had selected the number 2, Candidate Ben Zion by default was assigned the number 1, so now Candidate Holsopple will be assigned the number 3, and this will be for the speaking order. So I have the results here, 2-1-3, meaning Candidate Haywire will present first on the next item, followed by Candidate Ben Zion, followed by Candidate Holsopple. And the next item pertains to the second core ideal of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, and that is that the Transhumanist Party supports a cultural, societal, and political atmosphere informed and animated by reason, science, and secular values. Candidate Haywire, please proceed. You have 5 minutes.
Happily. This actually ties into a question that I just read on the YouTube channel from Kimberly Forsyth about how we could get transhumanism out to the younger generation and how this is related to reason and culture. And this is actually a really important question for me because culture is one of my main areas, and I define as a cultural futurist. Now, I think the way to get reason and science out to culture is to create a culture of reason and science. Now, whether this is through creating music and art with a rational message, whether this is through public education on transhumanism or funding the transgressive arts in a way that makes people aware of science. Our job as transhumanists is to make people aware of science and reason in a way that is accessible to them. This involves decreasing the importance of credentialism by getting people out of the ivory towers and into the media. It involves expanding our entertainment industry in a way where the new generation, the younger generation, is having a good time with science. Now, people like Bill Nye have tried to make science accessible, but I think that they have failed because they have come off as condescending. They've come off as preachy. They've come off as political shills, so to speak. So what we need is somebody like that, but with an entirely different approach. Somebody who isn't preaching political Kool-Aid, but that can make science fun and entertaining. And that is personally what I would like to see. So what I think would be really cool is to have a transhumanist entertainment network, a cultural entertainment center, something like a transhumanist entertainment mecca, where we can spread our political messages to the masses. It's funny because we're talking about messages being animated by reason and science, and what I'm thinking about is actual animation. What I'm thinking about is creating anime about reason and science and secular values. Now, what if we had an animation television show in which we had scientists discussing the scientific method through anime? Now, I remember growing up, I watched MTV. One of my favorite shows in the world was Aeon Flux. It was a cyberpunk dystopia about a lead character named Aeon Flux. She was a cyberpunk badass, one of my heroes, and she was dating a guy named Trevor Goodchild. He was an evil, mad scientist, fascist genius. They had a love-hate relationship going on with each other. Aeon's job was to fight Trevor Goodchild, but they were also lovers. Now, why am I bringing this up? Because they had a dialogue with each other where they came to a common understanding, but in the end, Aeon was fighting Trevor, but she understood where he was coming from. Now, what Aeon and Trevor did was fight this battle with each other in which they came to a common understanding, but Aeon was still on the side of good. What we need is people like Aeon Flux to usher in this new entertainment network. I was the head of an all-female industrial record label. Now, how is this relevant, you guys might be saying? Because I'm connected to hundreds of people like this through my career in the entertainment industry. There are so many women in the tech industry. There are women who code. There are women who make music. There are men who are making all sorts of engineering projects, artificial intelligence, virtual reality. We work together as a species. We are culture. We are the transhumanist generation. And what we need to do is be like Aeon and Trevor and kind of form our own transhumanist cyberpunk network of public education and media. And we can begin by creating these entertainment networks in which we reach the youth, in which we create our own cyber kind of punk networks. Cyberpunk 2077 is a great example of this kind of thing. It's a widely popular video game that's reaching a mass demographic of people. The avatars in this game, you can shift your body into any form. You're even going beyond gender. You're going beyond body at this point. You can do whatever you want with your avatar. You can do whatever you want. This is real morphological freedom. This is a popular video game. This is what I want to see more of. Culture, transhumanism, entertainment, evolution.
All right. Thank you, Candidate Haywire. And I believe you were right on time. So we will proceed to Candidate Ben Zion's remarks on the U.S. Transhumanist Party's core ideal number 2.
Excellent. Thank you, Gennady. Yes, there's been some discussion in the comments that I would like to address as well. The United States. This is something that Charles Holsopple has been very much on point in his campaign, and in the measures that he's supporting. And I don't think we can stress this enough. The United States is an incredibly wealthy country, by far the most wealthy country in the world in terms of GDP, and by mean income, it's well above most other nations as well. Certainly any nations of this size. And yet, we have a safety net. It's fairly robust, but it's not commensurate with our abilities. It's certainly not in keeping with the desire to have a more robust and healthy middle class. Now, maybe it's easy to say that hindsight is 20/20 on this. We've had a deregulation of the tax code in various ways. People point to notions like voodoo economics. One person will say one thing about the role of an economic system. Another will say another. But the simple fact is we're seeing a middle class that is in crisis right now. And it is why my campaign is focused on getting us outside of an echo chamber where we're discussing far futurist notions and talking to people, ordinary Americans, people who may not have a real investment in radical life extension or futurist notions. And some of those people, they're even highly critical of ideas like full voting, or very critical of a basic income at a middle class level. And their criticisms, we have to listen to them. We owe it to ourselves to be having these conversations. And we've been with the Futurist New Deal, we've been focusing almost to a very high degree, I won't say exclusively, on getting those conversations outside of the of our own rank and file party members and our own interested persons. And I think it's important to be having all of those conversations as well. But I think that it was why we came up with this title, The Futurist New Deal, for this set of economic reforms and e-governance reforms. And it was why we are continuing this strategy of reaching out to people, even and some of them don't want to hear it. Many of them have been very, very interested. An awful lot of people have been engaging with the Futurist New Deal materials and graphics and so forth. That's we talked a little bit about Zoltan Istvan. He ran what could be described as a one-issue campaign in a certain light, focusing on radical life extension, advocacy, and education. And honestly, if someone had chosen to do that again for the 2020 election, I think that would have been a good move. There's still an awful lot of people out there who don't know very much about super longevity and the state of the science today in this area. But I think it's also really important. There's an interviewer from the MIT Technology Review, who I'm going to be speaking to on Monday, and she's been critical of transhumanism generally on this particular point. We need to talk to middle-class people. We need to talk to ordinary people. We need to assure them that we can build bridges in terms of policy and in terms of culture to a world that can sustain radical life extension and a post-industrial economy. Ultimately, full automation is a thing that I think most of us are quite passionate about. This is an important point. In writing this speech, I was going to talk a little bit more about the anti-science sentiments in the United States, about what I would perceive as know-nothingism. But I think it's important to talk about the people in this country and how we can reach out to them beyond the party, as well as within the party. How am I doing on time?
You have 10 seconds.
Okay, so please learn a little bit about the Futurist New Deal and consider supporting this platform. It is a bridge to a better tomorrow, and this is a radical life extension is closer than you think. It's my campaign slogan. Thank you, Gennady.
Yes, thank you, candidate Ben Zion. And now we will shift to candidate Holsopple for his remarks on the second core ideal of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, the support of reason, science, and secular values. Candidate Holsopple, you may proceed. You have 5 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, science, technology, research, and ethics, and the societal values that we have are what I had in mind when I started my LinkedIn prospecting last March. And I prospected like I was the old lumber broker that I had been for 15 years, and that means try to catch everybody. Most of the people that I went after were scientists or leaders within the non-government organizational world, both governmental and non-governmental. And through that, and that's where I met Newton, one of the top IT scientists. That's where I met ultimately Gennady and Rachel and Ben, is through searching out scientific thinking people that used rational thought in their work and their profession. And that yielded not only the becoming a 501c3, but through that, I have now good contacts, educated contacts in Ghana, in Cameroon, in Kansas City, in Tampa, in Nepal, in Guatemala, in Mexico, that are saying 222 me too. It makes sense. It's something that I'm trying to do. It works within my mission and my goals. So, and that's the idea, is to reach every scientist and say, what can you contribute to the evolution of mankind's consciousness in relationship to the basic needs? What are those basic requirements so we can address what we need to? That requires science. It requires politicians, and it requires down ballot, which is something that I would like to emphasize as we popularize the message, something that other parties have to address. If it's a good idea, then we will get that message out, and then we can recruit scientists, we can recruit students, we can offer scholarships, we can bring their creative thought, the young creative thought, the old and tired creative thought, anything that makes sense that is verifiably true. And so much of what we deal with today is not true. And Ben alluded to that or called it out, that we need facts, and we need an authority that represents us, a representative government. And the only way we can have a representative government is to empower the people and activate the people with a common message. And again, the 222 message is I repeat it all the time. I talk to hundreds of people a week, dozens a day, veterans group, Veterans Without Orders, Vets Catch, a fishing group. And I mentioned that, so I told you I was one. But what really gets me is the 22, not the 222, but those 22 veterans that are committing suicide each day. And they're not, they've given their all, they've risked everything. And in many ways, society does not respect it. We say we do, but when they get home, we don't have a training program for them. We don't have a policy, a governmental policy to reintroduce those soldiers back into a caring community. And that costs lives every day. And it's unacceptable. the number of children that go to bed each night in the United States without adequate food is unacceptable. That creates a student that doesn't learn, and it creates a parent that doesn't know how to parent because they have not had the nurturing that is required. And if we have the understanding, if we have the scientific understanding that we can portray to each individual what they need to do to attain dignified access to food, water, shelter at a very base level, we will grow our ranks. And the idea is to grow the Transhumanist Party into a large party that helps influence policy. And if we're going to do that at a national level, we need a unifying message. And not saying that all these other radical life extension and cyborgs aren't important, because but they're getting funded. They're getting funded by billionaires, right? Some of them. So that is advancing quite rapidly, and will continue to advance because those that have self-interest. I'm looking to bring together a team that recognizes what our issues are, how to approach them, and the willingness to do it together, and the recognition that the least among us are our weakest link. They're also our greatest resource potential. And if we give them the basic elements of life, then we're going to be way ahead as individuals. I don't know if that's 5 minutes, but I'll reserve my time.
Yes, thank you, Candidate Holsopple. You exceeded your time by 1 minute and 10 seconds, so we will address that at the end of the debate. But thank you for your remarks, and I think this is a good bridge to the third core ideal of the U.S. Transhumanist Party, which is that the Transhumanist Party supports efforts to use science, technology, and rational discourse to reduce and eliminate various existential risks to the human species. Candidate Haywire, you have the floor to speak to the third core ideal.
Yes, I grew up not grew up, but in my late teens, early 20s, I hung out in Silicon Valley a lot, and I was surrounded by a lot of artificial intelligence researchers. I ran with a lot of Peter Thiel artificial intelligence researchers. They were very focused on AI risk and studying the existential risks of what could happen if AI took over the world. It was a big AI scare. And I learned a lot in my community when these things were discussed. The Machine Institute of Research Intelligence, which used to be the Singularity Institute, was where I gained a lot of this knowledge and information. And these threats were constantly assessed. What would happen if AI took over the world? And on the other end of things, I was also hanging out with a lot of working class people. And they were just worried about AI taking their jobs. So on one hand, people were worried, what happens if AI takes our jobs? Now, this was like over 10 years ago. And on the other hand, people were like, well, what if bad people get access to AI and some crazy, psychopath uses AI to kill all of the human race? So over here, I'm listening to concerns about people that are afraid that their jobs are going to be taken away. And over here, I'm listening to people afraid that somebody's going to use a malevolent AI to wipe out the human race. And I'm thinking, everybody's afraid of something. And that's when I started to think, maybe it's not AI itself, but what people are afraid that other people are going to do with AI. Now, maybe the real existential risk is what humanity is going to do with technology. And that was when I began to think that the real existential risk that we had was technology in human hands. And what could we do about that? What could we do to make humans use technology in a way that was less of a risk in itself? And that was when I came up with the idea of funding psychedelics for therapeutic research. because the more I thought about it, I realized that making psychedelics illegal was putting people in a place where they were having horrible mental health problems. They were feeling depressed. They were feeling anxious. They were suffering from PTSD. Psychedelics were making them feel better. They were curing them from PTSD. There were studies done where it was curing them. MDMA was actually used to cure people from PTSD. And I was thinking that people that have the potential, number one, to wipe out humanity through AI in the future might not do that if they had access to psychedelics and MDMA, first of all. Number two, that people who could have access to LSD for therapeutic remedies might have potential for new employment that AI couldn't take because they could use these psychedelics for therapy to have creative jobs that AI could never replace, because AI, as amazing as it could be at a high IQ scale, could never generate a creative action that psychedelics could enable humans to develop. Because you can't feed an AI psychedelics, no matter how smart it is. It doesn't have the human consciousness potential that the human machine has. Maybe in like 2090, we can feed an AI psychedelics, but we can't right now. So I believe that funding MDMA and LSD through therapeutic research is actually a great way to mitigate the existential risks that we have with artificial intelligence. And that is very important to me. And I think that is actually a way to cut down on both of the concerns of the working tech class and the more higher echelon people in this Silicon Valley elite. Because when you have angry people who don't have access to the therapeutic remedies of MDMA and LSD, ketamine would be another example of a drug that was just legalized for depression, but only in some cities. Now people are less depressed that are on it. They're feeling better. They're less likely to create an AI that's going to kill people because they're feeling good. Working class people who have had their jobs taken by AI, maybe, they have access to a trial in which they can do LSD. They're feeling better. They get a job in the arts. Suddenly they're working for a transhumanist entertainment company. AI not taking their job.
Thank you, Candidate Haywire. Once again, you were on time in your remarks. So we will proceed to Candidate Ben Zion on Transhumanist Party core ideal number 3 on the subject of existential risk.
Yes, thank you, Gennady. We know that our world is not without its risks. Many of these risks are not merely far future concerns about artificial singletons or gray goo or mad science run amok. We are already seeing downsides in many ways to automation and advanced algorithms from a contemporary civil rights perspective. It's easy for us to want to overlook these things in the new media landscape because we have benefited tremendously as a society from this network effect and connectivity in ways that we don't always want to acknowledge on a daily basis. We are more politically literate as a society. We are more agile. We have this kind of connectivity and many benefits that come from it. That's given a lot of people a lot of hope, a lot of strength. And all of these benefits are helping us a lot. But there are some downsides. I think we would be a little neglectful if we didn't talk about this Cambridge Analytica set of problems. But just since the dawn of the internet era, poverty statistics outside of the United States have gone down precipitously. And that's not a coincidence. And this is in part due to a sort of level of playing fields and more so an ability to better distribute goods and services and better make use of new markets to do these things. So in some ways, the number of the truly underserved people living in desperate poverty has gone down from the multiple billions to a much smaller number as a result of emerging technology. We've made numerous missteps. There were these big data influence operations that are affected the 2016 election, affected the 2018 election, will affect the 2020 election. These influence operations run by individuals like Robert Mercer and his Cambridge Analytica, which still exists. It's been rebranded. Charles Koch has data companies of this kind, as well as an entire operation for suppressing democracy to some extent. And even individuals like Peter Thiel. These are overtly political operations, yet they have dubious public service goals. They're not necessarily helping you. And there are a dozen more companies of this kind besides that have had a troubling effect on the running of fair elections in the United States. The dangers of advanced algorithms, they are already very real. And we can expect in a world where we are moving from Facebook sock puppets to more robust AI personalities, that we'll see a multiplication of this effect, a troubling notion. Many people in our community, we like to talk about the rights that might ultimately be afforded to artificial personalities. But in the near term, these artificial personalities are being used to trick and manipulate you. And we need to be at least somewhat vigilant on this score. We also need to consider that actual civil unrest, which is fomenting to some degree, may derive from advanced automation without making the policy, building the public policy necessary for a basic income or other systems that would allow for people to continue to live even as a jobless future takes away their ability. So we should not focus merely on these operatic outcomes, mad science gone awry, or AI. I prefer the term advanced algorithms. Becoming so powerful, AI and advanced algorithms generally could conceivably become so powerful as to be unstable by their nature. I'm of a mind to think that we will be able to create oversight of these kinds of things. Algorithms that are advanced enough to do the kinds of things that we are talking about are almost certainly going to be advanced enough to oversee these systems as well. But we should look at also the present day roles in surveillance, talking about the USA Patriot Act, the growing role of corporate surveillance. On the other hand, we need to embrace an open society paradigm, something important to the futurist New Deal, that will allow us to cooperate as a society towards this oversight. This will prevent mad science going awry, which I feel is a larger danger. But even that is a small danger, and AI as well. So consider the futurist New Deal as you look to these future concerns. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Ben Zion. You have spoken for 5 minutes and 20 seconds. So now we will proceed to candidate Holsopple and his thoughts on the subject of overcoming existential risk using reason, science, and technology, which is the third core ideal of the U.S. Transhumanist Party. Candidate Holsopple, you have the floor for 5 minutes.
Okay, for 3 minutes and 18 seconds. Yeah, the existential threats, whether they be, what's a cause and what is a result, but climate change, healthcare, pollution, conventional war, nuclear war, abuse against women and children, and the refugee situation, which is hundreds of millions. And so what do we do about that? What do we know about that? How much data do we have on each individual and what their needs are? And what do we measure that against? I'm back to 222. So if you have refugees, and I'm going back to that because it's very much in the news and it's something that we can help capture the attention of for the Transhumanist Party. If we have something that says it's a solution, and we identify the cause and we use what we know in order to address it collectively. And those people that are fleeing, migrating, are going for three reasons, and that is security of food and water. So security of food, water, and shelter. That's why people are moving. And I would too if I didn't have it here in my safe little space in Tampa, Florida. And so would anybody else. And they would also commit crimes if they had to feed their children. So the existential risk that I mentioned, all have in common, if whatever, I mentioned all these billions of dollars that are going through our nonprofit philanthropic community, close to $1 trillion, I have heard, collectively. And when you add in the governmental spending of humanitarian aid, it's a huge number. And those existential threats are continuing: the pollution, the need for health care, and unfortunately the abuse against women and children and men to a large degree. We're all a bit abused by the system. And we need to widen our perception of what our threats are. And in order to do that, we have to take them, ironically, one by one. So the nuclear threat, I became more acutely aware of it when I was in Washington, D.C. during the Occupy movement, living on a tent, as I mentioned, 3 blocks from the White House for 3.5 months. And during that time, I met Concepcion Picciotto. She was 72 years old, and she was in front of the White House at the anti-nuclear vigil. And she had spent most of her days and nights since 1981 there calling for nuclear disarmament. And that was something that someone had to be there at this little hut that was not a hut, it's a little umbrella with some visqueen, about 200 cubic feet of space, that 24 hours a day someone had to be there, whether it was 10 degrees and snowing or 100 degrees and out in the hot sun. So that vigil has been there since 1981, and I've spent during that winter a couple of thousand hours as the only one there relieving Connie so she could go back to her apartment. She wasn't homeless, but she went every day to confront this existential threat and the others. She was a bit slanted, as you would be if you spent 25 years on the sidewalk. But that was her dedication. She's passed. But during that time, I met activists, Medea Benjamin with Code Pink, and Bill Moyer with Backbone Campaign, and Kevin Zeese and Margaret Flowers with the Popular Resistance. And those people they get it. And they have actually built a shadow government in many cases. They supported the Green Party. They're in support of the Green New Deal to address these common existential threats that we face. And they're doctors and they're lawyers and they're scientists. And we need to listen to them, and we can use their platform. If we have a platform that is merit-based, that people can rise to the level of their self-dependence, their independence, and they're able to contribute back to society. We have brain power that is trying just to get food and water and shelter. We have many professions that are displaced, that we need to harness all of our knowledge, all of our collective knowledge, and put it to the best use possible.
Thank you. Yeah, so Candidate Holsopple, you spoke for 5 minutes and 30 seconds. Would you like to continue on this point or reserve your time for a subsequent item?
Yeah, I'm good for now. I'm looking forward to questions if we get some.
Yes, we are going to get to the area of questions soon, but first we are going to have a segment that I will call Rebuttals and Miscellaneous Remarks, in which each candidate will have 3 minutes or if you want to use, let's say, the compensating aspect of your time, then candidate Ben Zion will have 2 minutes and 35 seconds. Candidate Holsopple will have 1 minute and 20 seconds, and candidate Haywire will have 3 minutes. Or you can speak longer, and then that time would be subtracted from your concluding remarks. But based on the order we've established, candidate Haywire, you have 3 minutes for any miscellaneous remarks or rebuttals to anything that has been said so far.
Great. Okay. So there's some people in the live chat that were complaining. They seem to be very annoyed at my comments about drugs. But there were some people that were supporting. But let me just say first about the psychedelics that I mentioned. They were legally supported as therapeutic remedies before they were illegal. These were not illegal. They were funded as therapeutic research before they were illegal. So you guys are basically complaining about substances that were used for therapy. So put that in your pipe and smoke it. Thank you very much. I want to say that we need to bring fresh blood to transhumanism. We've had a lot of people that really aren't familiar with the youth. We've had a lot of people that aren't really familiar with the arts and culture. We've had a bunch of, I hate to use this term, but STEM lords. We need people that are aware of what's going on in the arts and culture. We need people that are familiar with the youth. We need people that are familiar with the disaffected. I have unfortunately been accused of being alt-right, which obviously I'm not, but I have dealt with people in the alt-right. I have no shame in admitting that. I've dealt with people in the far left too. There are many disaffected and disenfranchised members of society. They feel very left out of the political mainstream. And I am very good at making people who feel left out of the political mainstream feel like they are a part of the system. I was the founder of a dissident political website called Trigger Warning that brought people that felt like they didn't have a political voice into the system. We were funded by some high-level investors in Silicon Valley and DC. And the site was actually just relaunched this past week. You can check it out today, triggerwarning.us. It's a site for people who feel left out of the mainstream discourse to participate in freedom of speech and expression. Now, we're third-party candidates. We don't really have a voice in the political mainstream, but we need one. And I am a candidate that's going to bring people on the fringes together to unify us under the banner of the Transhumanist Party. Now, maybe I'm not going to convince people that are already in power to become transhumanists, but what I am going to do is convince disenfranchised people from all over the political spectrum to come on over to the Transhumanist Party and participate in politics for the first time in their lives. I've had anarchists, hip-hop artists, homeless people, rappers, random people, mad scientists. And one guy, he described himself as an anarchist poet with a love for French philosophy and vegan cuisine, who liked long walks on the beach of his mind, quote, who had never voted before, who was going to be voting for me and writing me in. And I think that this is the kind of outreach that we need to be doing. I believe that I can energize support from many people, both within the party and without, that have never previously voted before in their entire life. People who have never voted, people who have never gone to the voting booths, I believe are going to vote for me. And I think I'm going to bring a lot of attention to transhumanism just because of the outreach that I have done as an artist, a musician, an entrepreneur, and a founder. And I think that I'm what the Transhumanist Party needs. Not to make it about me, but it's about people like me, people in the creative class of America, the tech working class that are doing the outreach that we are, that are going to make transhumanism popular again. That's what we're doing. We're making transhumanism cool again. We're making transhumanism fun again. And I'm happy to take any questions from the audience.
Yes, thank you, candidate Haywire. You have spoken for 4 minutes. So now we will proceed to candidate Ben Zion. Candidate Ben Zion, you have 2 minutes, 35 seconds.
Okay. So I'd like to say that we talked about Zoltan Istvan and the federal land lease program to fund this middle class $52,000 payout per adult UBI. This is a game changer, a serious thing, and $173 trillion will be generated over a period of 10 years by this federal land lease program. Now, that's maybe just sound like a big arbitrary number, but that's enough to fund a middle class UBI. That's enough to fund a single payer health system and other important safety net measures besides. Some of the comments in the chat were talking about whether my UBI at $52,000, Rachel's at $24,000, whether these would detract from other payouts or benefits. And the short answer is, if there's a cash payout, yes, it would detract. If there are other benefits or systems, they would be largely unaffected. It's a little more complex than that. So we want to make sure that we're talking about what we are doing for people. You know, Rachel spoke about her outreach to people within our community. I'd just like to say that we've been doing some outreach of our own. I've been speaking to people in the Technocracy Party. I spoke to their leader just a few days ago. I've been speaking to people in the Flux Blockchain Voting Party. We have a kind of a partnership with them. I spoke just a few days ago to a top-tier libertarian candidate, Adam Kokesh. We spoke for about 2 hours on subjects about the dangers of our military-industrial complex, and also the kinds of reforms that we have talked about here today with the Futurist New Deal. Further, we've been reaching out to people in the Green Party, people who would be described as Justice Democrats, all manner of independents, and people within the two-party system. Those voters are responding to what we are doing. So this is how we build a big tent, talking to a lot of different people, getting as much outreach as we can, creating those policy discussions with different parties and organizations to move our party out of the third-party status and into the limelight. Thank you, Gennady.
Thank you, Candidate Ben Zion. I will say that you spoke for precisely your allotted time, and
all right,
we will move to Candidate Holsopple. Candidate Holsopple, you currently have 1 minute and 20 seconds for any rebuttals or miscellaneous remarks.
Thank you. I have to say, first of all, with controlled substances and the drug incarceration, I think drugs should be decriminalized, and research is always a good thing. Ben Zion and I agree on a lot of things fundamentally as well. Primarily, I didn't hear him mention, I'm sure he did, is a public land use for the public good and rebuilding meccas that have infrastructure with water and food and jobs. And I think that is a winning hand that I haven't heard from other parties. And I have heard about the universal basic income, and whether I think how it would fit in, as Ben said, there's many questions on that, but it certainly has to be looked at. But mostly what we need is everybody up to that 222, and I think that can bring the party together. It's something that the other parties don't have. It's catchy, and it's something that is you can tell that I'm passionate about, but we can make it part of the consciousness. What we need is a collective consciousness awakening to build a peaceful and prosperous society. And that algorithm of 222 over 7.6 billion equals one life. And and life needs 222. So that's my 1 minute, 28 seconds, I think.
Thank you, Candidate Holsopple. I would say, according to my timer, you were close enough. So I will essentially restore the standard time allotments to you. And during our next segment, we will address audience questions. Now, the way I'm going to approach this is group similar questions into one question subject so that we can get to as many questions as possible. So the first area of questions will be with regard to growth and outreach. And I know that some of you have already broached the topic, so feel free to expand upon your existing remarks or address the nuances of these questions. I'll note several questions here. Dan Elton asks, what specific plans do you have to grow the transhumanist movement, both as a political force and as a broader intellectual and social movement? Kim Forsyth asks, I would like to know how each candidate would work to unify the movement, as opinions on what defines a transhumanist differ widely. Pavel Ilin asks, question for all candidates, how are you going to interact with a low future shock level opposition, that is an opposition that simply can't conceive of the transformative changes that the transhumanist vision posits will happen in the future? And then finally, Blake Crosby asks, what is the plan to bridge the gap between transhumanism and religious groups who are 75% of the US population, many of whom are openly against the ideas of life extension and a society informed by science? So again, this is a question on the subject of growth and outreach in all of these dimensions. Candidate Haywire, you have the floor.
Okay, you might have to remind me of all of these questions. Can you go one by one?
Yes. So Dan Elton asks, what specific plans do you have to grow the transhumanist movement, both as a political force and the broader intellectual and social movement?
Okay, so when I started the Extreme Futures Festival in 2011, my plan was to bridge the gap between the high-tech sector and the arts and culture movement. I would continue to throw events like this in the Bay Area, Los Angeles, New York, and I would eventually make these international events. I would book my friends' bands. I would book artists that were doing virtual reality projects, that were doing algorithm-based music, that we're doing all sorts of wild transgressive projects. This would tie into my funding for the transgressive arts. In addition, I would book life extension scientists, people that were working on mind uploading projects, people that were working on genetic research, and I would mesh it all together, continuing to do what I did for the Extreme Futures Festival. I threw another event called Instead. It was like an alternative TED. So I would continue in this direction of bringing together all classes of society with the tech and the arts sector, and just continuing on that path of merging together these sectors of culture to bring the arts scene into technology and to make people in the higher echelons of tech more aware of what's going on with the mainstream.
All right, thank you, Candidate Haywire. The next question is, how would you work to unify the movement as opinions on what defines a transhumanist differ widely?
That's a good question, because a lot of people do have different opinions on that. Some people think that transhumanism is only defined by life extension. Some people think that transhumanism means singularitarianism. Other people think that it means the next step of evolution. I'm one of the people that thinks that it means the next step of evolution. I would say that transhumanism means what you believe that it means. But if we're going to go under one banner, I would say that transhumanism means expanding of the species. I think that's something that we can all agree on.
All right. Thank you, Candidate Haywire. And then
I have a question.
Yes.
I have a question for Candidate Haywire. You spoke a little bit about a breakthrough in limb regeneration. I follow scientific journals fairly closely. Mm-hmm. Can you tell us a little bit about that, about this study that you're talking about?
Well, it's not a specific study that I was referencing. I just remember going to a transhumanist conference about 7 years ago, and I was watching a talk about rejuvenating medicine, and I remember watching a limb regenerate. And it was just really groundbreaking, and it blew my mind. There was a limb and it had been cut off. And like a starfish, it regenerated. And I was just like, oh my God, this is incredible.
And a number of steps have been made towards that. Yeah. It's not being done yet.
I would love to see it done. Any funding in that direction. If you're watching this and you have that money, please fund that technology.
Yes.
All right. Well, I think we all support regeneration of limbs and technological progress in this area. Now, Candidate Haywire, do you want to address the question on the low future shock level opposition and how to respond to them?
Yes, I think people do need a gradual approach. This is where the culture and media comes in. I think that artists like Lady Gaga and that Poppy, actually, Poppy is kind of like a more intelligent Lady Gaga. She uses kind of like shocking futuristic imagery to bring people into the future levels that we're experiencing. She has a video called Your Time Is Up, and it has ironic kind of climate change, apocalyptic themes, and she kind of brings people into future shock through pop music. So I'd say using culture to make people more desensitized to future shock levels.
Thank you, Candidate Haywire. And the last of that series of questions was in regard to how to build bridges with the 75% of the US population who are religious and how to enable that portion of the population to be more receptive to the transhumanist message.
I'd say the Turing Church is doing a good job with the Mormon Transhuman Association. There are some Christian transhumanists that I know of today. I think that there's already a good percentage of people that are working on bridging the gap between religion and transhumanism. There's definitely a spiritual quality in transhumanism right now. There's a common theme of transcendence. If we're talking about the Bible Belters, why don't we just talk about reaching a higher state, right? We're reaching a higher state. They're reaching a higher state. Let's find common ground.
All right. Thank you, Candidate Haywire. And I realize with this sequence of questions, it is going to take longer than 2 minutes to answer all of them. So Candidate Ben Zion, I'm going to give you 3 minutes and 30 seconds to answer that series of questions. If you need me to remind you of any of the questions, please let me know. But for now, I will let you begin.
Okay. Well, I'd like to say that what Rachel said about the Mormon Transhumanist Association, this is a very robust, intellectually engaged community that a lot of them based in Salt Lake City. I had hoped to shoot a little mini documentary up there about some of the people that I met in that community, because really there's a lot of great communities for transhumanists, but for one from the religious worldview, the Mormon Transhumanist Association really has done a lot of good work in building the kind of bridges that we're talking about. I would actually like to address another question from the comments in the chat before I get to these, and a shout out to Taylor B. Taylor B expressed some concerns about environmental damage to the national parks caused by the federal land lease UBI, begun by initially spearheaded by Zoltan Istvan, that we've carried through to the Futurist New Deal. And this is a legitimate concern, and it's something that I did not address in my other speeches. Our federal land lease program will have a stipulation that only carbon neutral companies will be participating in this. And also a further stipulation that only companies that adhere to a very specific set of aesthetic standards, not overwhelming the surrounding area, not causing it to become an eyesore or causing any sort of damage of this kind. There's a lot, it's a big country in the United States. North America is a big place. There's a lot of land here where we could build these things that's not going to be making a travesty out of Yosemite, something like this. So I think that was a point that I wanted to make. And thank you, Taylor, for asking that question. Thank you, all of you guys in the chat, for really engaging and elevating these discussions.
Mm-hmm.
I guess I might need one or two of those other questions again, Gennady.
All right, certainly. So I would emphasize the question with regard to how to unify the transhumanist movement as to what defines a transhumanist, and how to do this in light of different opinions. That is, we can work together in spite of our differences, hopefully, but how do we achieve that?
Okay. This is an important question from my initial candidate declaration, a question that you asked me about. How do you reach out to people beyond the current membership of the Transhumanist Party, and how do you address people in context of radical life extension specifically? Candidate Haywire alluded to this. The perhaps ideological differences, and one of the questions alluded to this more directly. The ideological differences from religious worldviews or socially conservative worldviews that might prevent us from achieving a universal longevity escape velocity. I'm of a mind that we already have the basic infrastructure and the basic behaviors to allow for super longevity. Everybody goes to their primary care physician every few months. If their primary care physician recommends an intervention to them, they take this advice. That's only going to continue as new interventions come to market. So I like to refer to these people, maybe your own mother, maybe your family members who are not techno-optimists in the staunchest sense. These people are still de facto life extensionists. They're going to be pursuing these interventions. And so I don't think that we need to have a gigantic sea change towards acceptance in this area to have this happen. I think it's going to happen as a matter of course. I think there's a lot of areas that we need to be proactive in addressing, but I think that life extension, I think we're well on our way.
All right. Thank you, Candidate Ben Zion. I think we will move to Candidate Holsopple now in addressing questions about how to grow the transhumanist movement, how to unite the transhumanist movement, how to reach out to other constituencies who may not conceive of the future the same way we do, or who may have religious or philosophical beliefs that are different, and how nonetheless to appeal to them as well. Candidate Holsopple, you have the floor.
What a great question, because it really outlines a plan, right? That lets us know what we need to do. And from that, we can reverse engineer it and figure out how to do it. And that's how I did it to gain the membership for Project 222. And because it's a little distracting here with some of the technical difficulties I have, and even so, I would recommend everybody go to project222.org, and you'll see a lot of the answers to the questions. It mentions religion and all of the different factions and how I envision working that out together. But in summary today, every religion honors life, and the far right religions here, we call their right to life and pro-life, and we need to take it to them and give them the scientific logic, the presentation well presented on how they can save lives in having different actions and using their philanthropic dollar to save lives and build community across the world and reach out. Now, the advantage that I've got have already started Project 222 is we have universities in Cameroon, in Ghana, in Nepal, university students, graduate students, people working within nonprofit organizations that already say 222 me too, that are ready to use their skills and their education and their positions to work up the chain to the decision makers within those organizations. So 222 is going to grow. I have a intern coming from Nepal in just a few months, and we'll build out the social media platforms and the standard operating procedures for dealing with different chapters. And we'll work within each university. I'll be traveling different parts of the United States and different parts of the world to coordinate those. I won't be coordinating. Once they're coordinated, I will go there to do whatever I can to gain more support for them. And we'll introduce grant proposals to use for collaborative efforts with different organizations, whether it be organizations that we're already in contact, like Veterans Without Orders and Nursing Beyond Borders, many others that have expressed interest, both in the U.S. and international organizations. But they haven't formally done it yet because we don't have as firm a platform as we need. Through the Transhumanist Party, those are the same issues that we have. We have good ideas, but we need to popularize them. And to do that, we have to find commonality with the different religions, with different corporations, and share a common vision that is bigger than what we're faced with today, because what we're faced with today is the minute issues that, in compared to the real problem of our fractured society. And that is the question for the day. How do we bring together a fractured society? And I say we go back to Maslow's basics and food, water, shelter to reach our higher self. And we need to do it individually. We strive to do it individually, and we need to do it as a society. And we need to strive to do it as a society. It's not going to be easy. We're going to have to talk to our neighbors. So if you feel that you have that your dedication, that your passion, and your attention is worthwhile in the Transhumanist Party, then please share it with those most likely to get, and maybe they can reach the ones that are close to it now. I like to use the analogy or metaphor, whatever it is, I get them confused, that if you're raised all your life to keep your foot on the head of the snake, and whatever else you do, you just keep your foot on the head of the snake so you don't get bit or your neighbor doesn't get bit. Well, if you realize that is not a snake, it's actually the water line that is starving the people down the street, and eventually you're going to get starved. You need to be taught to that by someone that you trust, by someone that you have total confidence in, for you to let your foot up just a little bit. And that's what we need to do with each other, is calm down a little bit, find the common ground, and take necessary action based on transparent presentation of facts and opportunities.
All right. Thank you, Candidate Holsopple. You spoke for 5 minutes and 10 seconds in response to the series of questions, and I understand the questions were multifaceted and in some ways required a lot of elaboration to respond to. So I will move on to the next series of questions, and this pertains to the major political parties and the two-party system. In particular, there are two questions from the audience and one related question from me. Khan Kaprulu asks, in which areas can common ground be found between the policies of the Transhumanist Party and those of the GOP and Democrats in order to appeal to a larger voter base? Daniel Yeloashvili asks, how will the transhumanist movement navigate the limits of the two-party system from within the confines of a third party? And then my question is, what are your proposals for overcoming the toxicity of contemporary politics? Because I'm sure we don't want to emulate the two-party system or the major political parties. We wish to surpass them and transcend them and do better than they are doing in terms of our conduct and our policy proposals. Candidate Haywire, you have the floor.
Am I able to address a YouTube comment while I address this question too?
You may use your time as you see fit. So,
great. Okay, so I have a concerned troll named Stacy Schultz who has been persistently complaining about me not having viable political experience because I have too much passion or something of that sort. Apparently, I'm too excited or something of that sort, and I need to work within the system. It's pioneers and visionaries that have changed things. Steve Jobs was a visionary and a pioneer. Bill Gates, visionary, pioneer. They worked outside of the box. They became extremely successful. So, you know, Stacey, maybe you need to go back to the Humanist Party. Thank you. Anyway, to address the question that you were talking about before, I think the two-party system is a disaster. We've all known that for a while. That's why we have the Libertarian Party. That's why we have the Socialist Party. That's why we have the American Independent Party. That's why we have the Freedom Party. So there are people that have been working to create third-party alternatives for a while. The Transhumanist Party, thanks to people like Zoltan Istvan, is only one of the many parties that have been working to create viable alternatives to the two-party system. It's very important for us to create something besides the Democrats and the Republicans. We have red and we have blue, and because of that, we have two parties that are doing nothing for us. Now, we are an alternative, one of many alternatives, but I think that we are a great alternative. The more people that become aware of transhumanism, the better. And we have people from all walks of life in the Transhumanist Party. We have techno-progressives, we have techno-libertarians, we have extropians, we have techno-singularitarians, and we have groups like Zero State. We're all over the map politically. But what unites us is beyond politics. My slogan personally is beyond the center. What unites us is our desire to transcend the human state as it is and to create a higher species, to create something beyond what we currently are. So I think the great way to go beyond the two-party system is to advocate for a higher state of humanity. And I think that we're currently doing that. Now, as I was talking about before, finding people on the fringes of society and uniting them under the banner of transhumanism is a really good way to bridge these connections into this third party that we're currently building. And I would like to see more of that in general. We're a third party. Now, maybe we could recruit people that are disaffected from the GOP. We have people that are fed up with Trump. They voted for him. They didn't get what they wanted. We have Democrats who voted for Bernie that were unhappy that he got screwed over. I personally don't like the way that Bernie was treated as a third-party observer. So disaffected people from both parties, they're welcome to become transhumanists. They might have similar goals to us, and we welcome them into the Transhumanist Party.
All right, thank you, candidate Haywire. So you spoke for 3 minutes and 15 seconds. That gives you an additional 15 seconds to add to the closing remarks. And now, candidate Ben Zion, you have 3 minutes and 30 seconds to address the question regarding the two-party system and how do we interact with it? How do we avoid the toxicity of the two-party system?
Yes. Well, there's it's pretty easy I think for anyone to talk in the abstract about the winds of change and what might be done. But we're in a unique unique point in history with respect to this two-party system. I was just talking with the vice chair of the Arizona Transhumanist Party, my primary working partner on this campaign, and we were talking about a gentleman named Justin Amash, who has left the Republican Party and who had already at that time had been had an exploratory committee towards running for president on the Libertarian ticket prior to leaving on July 4th the Republican Party. The point being that this two-party system has lost a lot of confidence from ordinary people. They managed to micromanage through a sort of a high level of control with these lobbies, and they've managed to curate the political system itself, but the people are not on their side. And we have an opportunity now, if we are able to speak in a language that ordinary people will understand to advance transhumanist goals and to advance radical life extension goals. And I think that the Futurist New Deal is by far the best choice for reaching people in this way. We've demonstrated that we are going to be out there doing that, talking to people, making those connections, building those bridges to the far futurism that we all want through real world public policy initiatives. I will preserve the remainder of my time for my closing remarks. I should say, Gennady, that I'm really low battery, so I might have to call you back I think I'm at like 8%. I might have to call you back without video feed.
Thank you, Candidate Ben Zion, and we recognize the technical difficulties. You are welcome to call us back if that transpires. So I will add 1 minute and 30 seconds to your closing remarks. And Candidate Holsopple, you have the floor regarding the question of how to interact with the two-party system, how to be better than the two-party system, and avoid the toxicity of the Republican and Democratic parties today.
Sure. And I relate to the technical difficulties. Sorry, I'm having them as well. But the parties now, we've taken sides on different problems and different policies, and one always is arguing with the other. We, the Transhumanist Party, are full of scientists and research and the ability to process that and come up with new and exciting new things. Those are the people that make the current Transhumanist Party, from what I understand. And we need to put together, looking at the problem, policies that make sense with research and the ability to educate the public. So it's not going to be easy. The three of us are not going to be president of the United States in 2020. The odds are 1 in 7 billion or something. I don't know the odds, but we need to come together with a message that makes the Republicans think, makes the Democratic voter think, and crafts not only our message but their message, and it becomes a topic of conversation of why this is scientifically true. We have artists in the Transhumanist Party, and we have, as Rachel says, we have a diverse culture from the fringes to the most scientists, that we need to utilize that. But we need that common message, and that common message is life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And we all recognize that, and half of America is struggling on the first part. They're in debt, they have jobs they don't want, and they want a better way. And many of those would invest in those planned communities somewhere else, particularly if the existential risk of rising water is going to displace them, or storms. So those are Republicans, those are Democrats. If we put together a plan that makes sense, that's attractive, we can control the conversation. And through the artists, through the different studios, we can make it animated. We can educate, and that's what it all gets back to, is education. Security, education. And if we're so smart, if I'm so smart, I should be able to get across to someone that, hey, it's better off if we conserve this water because we're going to be here for 2 days. We went on a picnic. Let's not use all the water. It's that simple. We have the knowledge, the data of everything known, and we can crunch it into different candidate methodologies and present it to the people and say, what about this? And that's what we need to do as a party.
Thank you, Candidate Holsopple. We appreciate your remarks, and according to my time, you spoke for 2 minutes and 50 seconds on that question. So that adds some time, 40 seconds back to your closing remarks. And next, we will proceed to another question, which is in regard to China. Dane Fitzgerald asks, do you think China has a more science-friendly political culture than the US? And this is a shorter question, so we will leave 2 minutes for the question. Candidate Haywire, you have the floor.
I'm going to charge my laptop. So if you want to move on and then just have me go after the next person, I'm just going to plug my laptop in so we don't get disconnected. Just give me 1 second. If you want to like just mute my screen for a second.
That's fine. Candidate Ben Zion, do you have the ability to speak?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Yes.
Okay. I'm hoping we're not getting a crazy feedback loop. I have my phone has for some reason newer generation phones seem to be embracing a design flaw wherein there's only one port for charging and AV as opposed to two. So I have you on speaker. Yes, China. This is an interesting area, and I don't think that we as transhumanists should ever avoid the subject of deregulation in general, and regulatory frameworks, and how that affects our these techno-progressive and technologist outcomes. I know a lot of people who are very critical, and rightly so, of the military-industrial complex and the Pentagon and Pentagon bloat, a serious concern. But all of the things that allow us to be having this conversation with one another right now, many of those things were developed by DARPA and Pentagon funding. And so it's, we can, hi, Rachel. Sorry. So we can always expect that there is, even to these trillions of dollars which are wasted by the Pentagon, there are upshots to that. I believe that in the networked world we can do better by empowering citizen scientists. And there's a person who I very much admire in this conversation, Josiah Zahner, who's a thought leader in this area. I'd love to interview you on the Futurist New Deal podcast. But empowering a connected society of citizen scientists, we can do things as a syndicate that a syndicate like the Pentagon could never achieve. And China is in some ways allowing for a pretty good balance of regulation and also state-funded initiatives that are well run compared to the ones that we have. And it's an interesting area. I certainly know more than a few transhumanists who say that depending how things unfold, they might just consider relocating their operations to East Asia. I don't think we should sound the alarm on that yet, but it can guide our thinking towards policymaking in optimizing those techno optimist outcomes.
Thank you, Candidate Ben Zion, for your remarks. And in terms of time allocation, you answered that question for 2 minutes and 20 seconds. Now, Candidate Haywire, if you are ready to answer the question regarding China and whether China has a more science-friendly political culture than the US, you have the floor for 2 minutes.
Yes, I am ready to answer that question. I think that, yes, actually, China does have an advantage in terms of having access to that kind of scientific technology. But at the same time, I'm very concerned about their surveillance. Their surveillance technology frightens me. And I think that we should be very careful of them, especially with what they have done in terms of copying our patents. So we need to keep China at an arm's length. I know that's an unpopular thing to say, but I'm concerned with the way that they treat their citizens. They have an authoritarian communist dictatorship. They have a social credit system that is quite horrifying, actually. And I think we need to be mindful of that. But at the same time, they have a lot of very, very incredible breakthrough innovations in the fields of artificial intelligence, you know, and genetic revolution. So I think that we can learn a lot from China, but I think we also need to be mindful of what they're doing with surveillance and what they're doing with copyright. So, you know, you learn from them, but you keep them at an arm's length. I don't approve of what a lot of has been going on with the global trading that we've been doing with them. I also believe that a lot of American tech workers have been displaced by the Chinese economy. It's a very politically incorrect thing to say. But I'm going to say it. You know, Trump, our president, is very focused on Mexican immigrants, but he ignores the struggles of the tech working class. I'm a member of the tech working class. I'm a, you know, aspirational CEO. I'm a freelancer in the gig economy. For me, it's much harder to deal with a lot of the Chinese overseas workers than, I mean, I don't worry about the Mexicans. So, you know, be careful with what's going on with Chinese labor, with Chinese wages, and with Chinese surveillance. But at the same time, admire their breakthrough innovations, admire their technological breakthroughs, because they are incredible. So, incredible things with China, horrible things with China. Be aware of both.
Thank you, Candidate Haywire. You spoke for 2 minutes and 30 seconds to answer that question. Candidate Holsopple, you have the floor with regard to the question of whether China has a more science-friendly political culture than the U.S.
Well, I have to say, I'm not an expert in the Chinese culture in any regard. And if I were president, that would be something that I would rely on experts to brief me in exactly what's going on. But generally speaking, China, Russia, and any of the other countries, but specifically China, is, as Rachel says, that they're all out. I don't think that they have the FDA that limits the research into medications, and they don't allow it to be beneficial to the public. So there's many restrictions in that regard. So I would say, yes, China is a freer society, but again, I don't know. But there's so much science done outside of government, in the corporations, and some restricted here in the U.S., but I have a feeling that it's going on anyway. LSD, as Rachel said, is against the law, but there's no shortage of it. There's no shortage of any controlled substance. It's just not allowed. So if the United States looks at things logically and ethically, and we look at the science, we will make better decisions, we'll make better laws that allow this technology that mankind is going to use, humankind, excuse me, that we're going to need in order to face these existential threats. We need to join with China, with all the other countries, in utilizing technology for the common good, and identify who's the good guys and who are the bad guys, and what are those decisions, what the policies we need to put in place, what technologies need to be developed, what other countries can we share our technology to help relieve their suffering so that they can help us. And it's time that we realize we are all in this together. There's more to what to life than what color jersey we have or what side of the stadium we sit on. We all go downstairs, we eat from the same concession, we drink the same water. We're on one side of the ocean, they're on the other side of the ocean. But the fish are the same. So it's the different nationalities and nationalism that is becoming more and more pronounced. The technology and empathy, they transcend that. And we as people we are not competing fairly. We've got the system rigged to take care of the most advanced and leaving those with the least behind. And we need to come together as people, as individuals, and I think the Transhumanist Party is a great way to demonstrate that. If we come up with plans that we can present that are new and fresh, and that's what I think we need. And to what the Chinese culture, I'd love to find out.
Thank you, candidate.
That's all I got.
Yes, thank you, candidate Holsopple. You answered that question in 2 minutes and 3 minutes and 30 seconds. And the next question is quite brief by design. This one is from Tom Ross. How would each candidate define a transhuman in 1 or 2 sentences? And according to the premise of the question, please keep it limited to 1 or 2 sentences. This will not count toward your time in either way. Candidate Haywire.
A transhuman is a member of the next step of evolution.
Thank you, candidate Haywire. Candidate Ben Zion.
A transhumanist is a techno-optimist who may allow for the possibility of something like radical life extension and ultimately upgrades to the human form as these become increasingly available.
Thank you, candidate Ben Zion. And candidate Holsopple.
Yeah, transhumanist is one that recognizes the impact of science and technology on their daily life, whether it be by wearing a pair of glasses or a hearing aid, anything that enhances the perceptions of the human existence that individual is aware of.
Thank you, candidate Holsopple. And next, in order to essentially address one of the major challenges that we have, which is we all want to live indefinitely or at least a long time, much longer than conventional lifespans today would permit. We do need to face certain obstacles within politics, within the culture, within the broader society. So in your view, in 2 minutes, could each of you explain what you consider to be the main challenges today in achieving life extension for all, or for as many people as possible during our lifetimes? And I specifically place the emphasis on the part during our lifetimes, because life extension research is advancing, but how to make sure that it advances in time for us. Candidate Haywire, you have the floor.
Yes, I have an answer to this that I'm pretty sure most of America would agree with. Our medical system is an atrocity right now, whether you're working class or upper class or anywhere in the middle. I think we need a great change in that. One of the things I advocate for is medical insurance for freelancers in the gig economy. But fact is, our entire medical insurance system needs to be overhauled. Obviously, we need to cure disease, we need to cure aging, but we really just need a better medical system in general. We need more research into curing disease. We need more research into medicine and science in general. The reason I focus on medical insurance for freelancers in the gig economy is because as automation increasingly takes people's jobs, we have this gig economy becoming more and more popular, and people pay out of pocket for medical insurance. So by providing freelancers in the gig economy with medical insurance, we're going to be able to help a lot of people that are being displaced from traditional working environments to afford medical insurance. And I think that's a step in the right direction. Another thing that I advocate for is cryptocurrency healthcare for specialized treatments. That's another part of my platform. By using the blockchain to fund specialized treatments, we can begin having all sorts of esoteric treatment available for people that have diseases that might not be on the map, that might not be covered by traditional insurance. I mean, even somebody that has millions of dollars, their insurance might not cover what they need.
they might not have something available. They might need to fly to a completely different country on the other side of the world just to get the treatment that they need. So I think that using the blockchain to fund different medical options is going to be a step in the right direction, so we can increase the human lifespan and have better healthcare for everybody in America.
Thank you, Candidate Haywire. And you answered that question in exactly 2 minutes. So we will proceed to Candidate Ben Zion on the question of what changes are necessary to ensure we have indefinite life extension for all during our lifetimes.
Yes. Well, I think that most transhumanists are aware that the hard work towards super longevity is being done. And this is reflected in the opinions of the effective leader of contemporary transhumanism, Ray Kurzweil. He's adjusted his figures. He's not by any means an overly optimistic person, but he's adjusted his figures in a more optimistic direction to reflect that he believes that we are 10 years away from having the medical capacity of to have longevity escape velocity. This is reflected in the work the man who's maybe contributed the most to this field directly, Aubrey de Grey, has adjusted his figures similarly. This is reflected but in the thoughts of perhaps the most accomplished geneticist alive, George Church. He has said that he also thinks that we are a decade away from achieving this. So this is why we need to be having these cultural discussions and policy discussions towards moving us to a society that is actually suited to implementing these interventions on a larger scale. Our healthcare system, as Rachel says, it is in a shambles, and we talked about this a little bit in our interview for the Futurist New Deal podcast as well. I enjoyed that, but we have a system where we could have a single payer system that would cost half as much for the total system, and for the average consumer it would be costing a quarter as much in terms of what their expenses in taxes versus literal expenses. And we need to be thinking in these terms, not just about cryonics and these larger interventions, but triage. How do we get the most people the quality of care that they would need so that they survive to a universal longevity escape velocity? And we can do this. Thank you, Gennady.
Thank you, Candidate Ben Zion. I will say that you spoke also for 2 minutes in response to this question. So next we will move to Candidate Holsopple. What can we do to ensure that there will be indefinite or at least radical life extension for all during our lifetimes?
Well, I'm not sure that we can, because I'm not a scientist in that regard, and I have not studied, but for radical life extension. But we can and we must work on significant life extension. And so that's the basis of my campaign, is significant. And I don't restrict the research and what it would take to become immortal, or at least some fashion of that. But it's not a driving force for me, and I really don't think it'll be a driving force for the people that we're trying to draw in. Those are the core hardcore. I don't think it was Julian Huxley's intent when he established UNESCO that we would have individual perpetual life. I think he was thinking that we need to take the planet as a whole, all those living on it, and find out what their basic needs are and provide that, find a way for science and technology and our governments to fund what's necessary to give significant life extension to those most in need.
All right. Yes, thank you, Candidate Holsopple. And you answered that question for 1 minute by my calculations, so you have gained a minute toward your closing remarks. And I will pose one more question from the audience before we move on to closing remarks. This question is from Dan Elton, and I think this is an important question given that right now we have a fairly crowded field of candidates for various parties, including one of the major political parties. But Mr. Elton would like to hear from each of you, what makes you stand out from the other political parties? What are your most radical, thought-provoking ideas that people should associate with you? And those ideas could be the reasons why the general electorate might prefer you over one of the many candidates from the other political parties. Candidate Haywire, you have 2 minutes.
Well, I think I stand out because I attract a lot of attention and controversy. Whether people are saying bad things about me or good things about me, they're always talking about me. And when you pronounce my name, it's Haywire. I make people talk. I make people think. I provoke them, and I entertain them. And it's always a show. But I also have a lot to offer in terms of intelligent discourse. I challenge people. I unite people. I empower the fringes. I entertain people in mainstream society who are sick of the same routine. I attract what you would call renegade elites. That's people at the top of society that are sick of it all, that want something new and refreshing. And I think people that want to have a good time, that believe in science, rationality, technology, progress of the human condition, are going to have a good time with me being president of the Transhumanist Party. And I think that I'm going to do a lot for the movement. I believe that I have a lot to offer for the culture, for the wider whole, for the third parties of America. Now, I do have some naysayers, but they're just going to attract more attention for me. I was just checking my Facebook for a minute. There was some girl, Kimberly Forsyth Institute, was accusing me of being the H+ Donald Trump. I don't know if that's supposed to be an insight, an insult or a compliment. I'm not a fan of Mr. Trump, but he was advocating for the working class of America. I'm advocating for working class transhumanists. I'm a working class transhumanist. Sue me. I want to help working class transhumanists. Oh my God, it's the end of the world. You know what, Kimberly Forsyth, go back to the Institute. You're the old guard. We're the new avant-garde, right? I'm a good time. We're having a good time here. If you don't want to have a good time, then go back to Humanity Minus, right? I think that people are going to enjoy themselves with me as president, and I'm a good person. I don't hurt people. I might be provocative and controversial, but at the end of the day, what I'm bringing is culture and entertainment and the evolution of the species to a wider audience. I'm bringing the underground into the mainstream, and I'm bringing the mainstream into the transgressive art world. And I really want to make transhumanism popular. My intentions are positive, my motivations are genuine, and I hope that you guys will join me. I want to bring you guys beyond the center with me. You can go to haywire2020.com. Please join me. Let's have some fun.
Thank you, Candidate Haywire. You answered that question for 2 minutes and 40 seconds. Now, Candidate Ben Zion, what makes you stand out beyond all of the other candidates who are running in 2020?
Well, in a word, it's not myself. It's the Futurist New Deal. It's the strength of this platform and what it will accomplish. You know, in January 21st, 2021, when I become the president, we will have contracts in place that will allow us to pre-fund a guaranteed minimum income, a universal basic income at $52,000 for every adult. And that is a game changer. That will allow people to be starting small businesses,
starting sole proprietorships, partnerships, cooperative forms, considering being able to leverage that to find jobs that are actually fulfilling for them, or pursuing what Andrew Yang calls the real economy, taking care of their families, living like a human being. These are things that are incredibly important, and the cost to our society in not really allowing for these things, it's considerable. It's a tremendous hidden cost that we are absorbing by this level of dysfunction. I'm not an entertainer. I'm a politico, and we're going to move this ball as far down the field as we can for e-governance and for humane economic policies. And that's what we've been doing with the Futures New Deal. People are interested in this. They're engaging us. People who you never would have expected to be taking an interest in things like universal longevity escape velocity. So I want to thank all of you, and I hope you'll consider the Futurist New Deal as you're making these decisions.
Thank you, Candidate Ben Zion. You answered that question for 1 minute and 50 seconds. Candidate Holsopple, what makes you stand out among all of the other candidates running in 2020?
Yes, thank you. 15 years ago when I retired, I said, I'm going to find something that I can do to help make a difference in the world. And I didn't retire. I set out, I thought it was going to be a couple of years. I'd find an organization and I would be able to instill this technology. And I really did end up back on my own. And during this past 15 years, besides the Occupy movement in 2011, I came to a head of like, I have to do it. This has been in my head since 2005. I'm trying to save the world. It's now 2013. I've gone without a car for the past 7.5 years. I bought a car. I drove 30,000 miles that year. Part of it took me to Burning Man, which, if you're familiar with Burning Man, it's an experience that just made me even more committed to the project. And I ended up in Berkeley, California. I threw my wallet away. I lived in the street or the park, People's Park there off Telegraph Avenue for 2.5 months. I ate with the homeless. I slept with the homeless in the open park where druggies and all kinds of humanity went, where veterans were there. It was a collage and a beautiful experience. I lost 30 pounds. I came back. I got hospitalized. It took me a year to recover. And out of that came 222, because I realized what everyone needs is food, water, and shelter. And just because they have it doesn't mean that it's dignified. And sometimes it's 2 miles away and the bathrooms are closed and there's nowhere to go. And humanity needs a unifying effort, not just the Republican Party, not just the Democratic Party, but we need to reach out cross-party. And I think I'm the guy to do it, because I've dedicated the past 15 years, and all of a sudden, here comes an organization like the Institute for Education, Research, and Scholarships that recognizes that what I'm doing is scientifically true. And then I get invited, and I'm honored to be running for the President of the United States, or at least the nomination to become the spokesperson for the Transhumanist Party. And I hope, if I do, that those transhumanists that have those specific issues and have the means to promote them come to me and say, what do you think about this? And if what I think about it and what they think about it is the same, we start to develop that policy to implement these changes that are required so that everybody can have dignified access to food, water, shelter, and science can take its natural course and help the species evolve.
Thank you, Candidate Holsopple. And you spent 3 minutes answering this question, which essentially does consume your closing remarks, but in some ways this is fitting because the nature of your answer delves into what a closing statement would have addressed. So we thank you for all of your comments today. We regret that we were unable to get you onto the live stream. We will endeavor to use a different platform next time during the debate. But in the meantime, before we get to the closing remarks of candidate Ben Zion and candidate Haywire, I recall earlier on there was a discussion between candidate Ben Zion and candidate Haywire on the subject of universal basic income. And candidate Ben Zion, if you still remember your follow-up question to candidate Haywire that you wanted to ask, this would be a good time to get that addressed.
I'm drawing a blank. What was that? What was the context?
Was it the regenerative medicine question, or was that the other one?
This was about
that was addressed.
income.
Okay.
Your respective proposals. Candidate Haywire, you have a proposal to essentially double Andrew Yang's.
Oh, yes.
And
Okay.
Candidate Zion, you have a proposal essentially drawing on Zoltan István's federal land dividend, except putting some qualifications on the companies that lease the federal land, and you would fund the universal basic income out of that. So you had a question for candidate Haywire along these lines before candidate Holsopple came onto the event.
Yes. Well, I do recall that discussion now. And Andrew Yang, a mainstream candidate for president who's running on a UBI, has had to address some of these questions. And I think his website, he has a very, very well fleshed out platform for an outsider candidate. Definitely. I mean, this is a very, very well written piece of policy.
Wait a minute. Is he outsider or mainstream? You just said he was mainstream, but then you said he was outsider. Can you tell me which one he is?
Well, in the sense that he's not a career politician.
Okay, but is he outsider or mainstream? Because you just called him both. I just want you to clarify.
Yeah, he's both. He's both.
Okay, so he's a mainstream outsider.
Yeah. He's a top tier Democrat who is also a not a career politician.
So maybe he's like a mainsider, or is he maybe like outstream?
Yeah, mainsider. Let's
I like outstream. Let's go with outstream. Okay, so what's your question?
So he's had to address questions about hyperinflation. I feel that the $52,000 land lease funded initiative is better poised to address those concerns about hyperinflation. I think that I also think that those hyperinflation concerns are a red herring. We've seen a very large amount of money lost in quantitative easing, and we did not see. We have a very fintech driven economy now. So some of these concerns. I'm also sort of a supporter of the basic ideas behind modern monetary theory.
Yes.
In that I don't think that we need to address all of these concerns for funding social programs in a fiat currency, particularly as these programs themselves contribute immeasurably to economies in a way that not having them does not. So I guess my question was, do you whether you wanted to speak more about the funding of your UBI or the tax initiatives that would surround that?
Sure, I'd be happy to. Actually, the cost of our military budget is $650 billion. Now, if we just got this in half and we send our troops home from Afghanistan and Iraq, then boom, we can take that money and give it to our citizens, not to mention the money that is being spent on the surveillance state. The money that is being spent right now on the DEA is $2 billion, NSA, 11 billion. Let's talk about the CIA. I'm sorry, the CIA. CIA, 27 billion. Now, we're not going to get rid of all of that. I mean, we're going to keep some. FBI, 9 billion. I'm a huge Tulsi Gabbard fan, as we talked about on the phone. She's talking about ending the Cold War. Thank you, Tulsi. You are my hero. We cut some of that, and I think that money is going to go to our people. Now, we can do that all without having hyperinflation. So I think that what you're doing is you're stating this hyperinflation problem where it doesn't exist, when all we really need to do is cut this military and surveillance spending. So I think it's a non-issue. But say that hyperinflation did exist. Well, we're using bunch of tariffs right now with China. That's $172 billion. So maybe we should look into that. But that's just my take. I would maybe want to debate Andrew on that. I mean, I don't know. What do you think about it?
Well, the continuation of the of Zoltan Istvan's federal land lease funding was in a concession to a number of kinds of realpolitik, including just the fact that it was popular within our party, but also, maybe just purely making the case for a modern monetary theory type of a not funded UBI would be, maybe it's concern trolling to say this, but it would be playing into the hands of these quote unquote fiscal conservatives who,
I see.
who would then have excuse to scuttle the program. They don't have such a ready excuse with the federal land lease funded program.
I see what you're saying. That sounds like some Alinskyan BS, if you want my honest opinion. That's basically like saying that because you're playing baseball, you're funding the soccer team. It just doesn't equate logically. You're not really connecting your I's and T's here. I'm not following your logic.
Well, the point is that creating public policy reforms is not something for the faint of heart. It requires going through a lot of existing institutions and a lot of ideas, flawed as they may be, that we have to address, and coalitions that need to be built, strange bedfellows need to be courted.
So if you're talking about like some Machiavellian realpolitik, then maybe you're the neo-reactionary.
Well, I think that there's nothing particularly Machiavellian about it.
You were the one who used the term realpolitik. I'm just speaking in your language back to you, Bum. But in all honesty, I completely see what you're saying here. And I just, while I understand your concerns, I just don't understand how cutting the military and the surveillance budget is going to play into the hands of the Soros. Right? I mean, how does it help the Koch brothers to cut the prison budget? Can you please explain that to me?
I mean, the $750 billion that you could that is that total budget, the amount that you could cover, it doesn't cover the spread that you would need to implement a $25,000 a year income. That's $6 trillion or something that you would need.
Okay, but I haven't read all of the numbers to you. You did just say that cutting the military and the surveillance budget would basically be putting money into the hands of the Koch brothers. That is illogical. It didn't make any sense. No, that was the statement that you used. I just heard you say it. You said this was falling into the hands of the fiscal conservatives when I said nothing of that sort.
Well, I'm talking more about an alternate plan of my own.
Oh, okay. So now you're changing the playing field. That's fair. Okay, I can understand. I mean, I love Marxist
I'm more inclined
dialogue.
to address my platform than yours.
Okay, no, I love Marxist dialogue. I play around with it all the time. It's great.
All right, candidate Haywire, candidate Ben Zion. This was an engaging discussion. I think I allowed for a bit of free-form argumentation here. I think it's only fair that we have candidate Holsopple weigh in as well on the subject of universal basic income, how to fund it, whether to use a federal land dividend, cut the military and intelligence agencies' budgets, or any other type of proposal that could, in fact, further the goals of the 222 project as well.
Well, yes, thank you for that opportunity. The universal basic income idea, theory, who's going to pay for it, who's going to get it. I would take it from a universal basic income to the income where it's most required to start. And if those making below the poverty line were given $1,000 a month to reinvest back into the economy, to their welfare, it's not too different than what we're doing, but I think we need to create a flow there to build resilient local economy. And we have to have an urban plan on how to do that. We have to have the infrastructure on where they're going to get some water. And we give them the opportunity to migrate. Again, we're into the refugee situation. This is real and present danger that people are living on the edge right now. Those are the people we need to reach. If we don't do that, all of these other things are not going to happen because we stand the chance of eliminating the human race. So we need to get back and say, what can we do to adapt to the real and present dangers? And how can we enlist the confidence of the populace, of the global population to cooperate, whether it be getting rid of cause or feeding the infants. We need to have clear decisions on what is possible, what is necessary, and then we have to have the courage and the vision to make that change. We can make a change. Do we have the will to make a change? And let's use science and let's educate everybody on what's critical that they know in order to transition this society, transition this humanity into the next existence. I just closed again, but thank you for that opportunity.
Thank you, Candidate Holsopple, for your input onto the question of how to fund a universal basic income or a more rudimentary type of income for individuals. I think with that, we are ready for closing remarks for candidates Haywire and Ben Zion. And judging by my calculations from the freeform exchange, you're roughly even on time at this point. And I think for the sake of brevity, if you could encapsulate your closing remarks in 1 minute each and make them as powerful as possible with regard to why you think those watching this debate should vote for you, then I think that would be the best way to conclude. Candidate Haywire, you have the floor for 1 minute.
Great. So first, I just want to thank everybody that's watching this for coming to tune in. I've really had a good time with this debate. Thank you, Ben Zion, for being a good sport in all of this. I hope you didn't take my statement personally. I'm just having a good time. Thank you, Charles. I love your ideas about going to Burning Man, reaching out to the homeless, helping people that are struggling. Thank you, Janady, for hosting this. To all of you that are watching, I really think that reaching out to people in a cultural way to bring politics into the mainstream is the most important thing that we're dealing with as a party right now, making transhumanism popular. We want transhumanism to be reaching a wide sector of the public. We want our third party to be the third party. And that's why I believe that I'm the candidate to make this happen. I think that transhumanism needs to be musical. I'm working with a hip hop artist now. His name is Maitreya One. He is one of my favorite people. He's writing a Haywire for President track. We want to spread transhumanism to the hip hop community. This is the kind of work that I am doing right now. And this is the kind of work that I believe that we need to be doing. I have friends that are painters that are working in VR. We want to be making transhumanist games for people to play. And we want to spread transhumanism to the wider culture. Transhumanism is culture. The politics of transhumanism are all about the culture of the wider whole. And I hope that I can guarantee the votes from all of you that are watching this today. Please tell your friends to vote for me for president of the Transhumanist Party. Thank you very much for your time.
Yes, thank you, Candidate Haywire. Now, I will clarify the vote would be for President of the United States.
Yes, for the transhumanist primaries. I mean, vote for me for the Transhumanist Party. For the Transhumanist Party, but vote for me for President of the United States, of course. But vote for me for the Transhumanist primaries first so I can win the United States presidency, of course. But I have to win the primaries first, just to be totally clear.
Yes, indeed. And by the way, our primaries will be held between August 11th and 17th. There will be a 7-day electronic voting period so that our members from all over
e-voting
will be able to participate. And if you want to join the Transhumanist Party prior to August 10th, 2019, go to our website at transhumanist-party.org. Go to the link that says free membership and sign up. It takes less than a minute. If you do so before August 10th, you will be eligible to vote in the electronic primary.
You can also go to haywire2020.com. My website just launched today, and I'm currently seeking donations. If you want to help contribute to my campaign, I'm currently looking to get better audio and video equipment so I can film more videos. We're currently looking for volunteers for our campaign staff. So hop on board the Haywire spaceship and come and be a part of the ride.
Very well. So now it seems like we're back to 2-minute closing statements, and this means candidate Ben Zion, you will have 2 minutes. And after that, candidate Holsopple will have another minute because the 2-minute time frame essentially causes him to regain 60 seconds of time. So candidate Ben Zion, you may begin with your closing remarks.
Yes. The campaign slogan for the Futurist New Deal is radical life extension is closer than you think. And I think that's an understandable sentiment to transhumanists. And I think that it's one that is increasingly understood by people outside of this party, the kind of people that we are trying to court. I've said it already. The Futurist New Deal has a basic income, a guarantee to all adults of $52,000 a year that is funded from the $173 trillion that would be earned from this federal land lease program, and that would also allow us to fill in the gaps in our woefully underfunded healthcare system. There's a lot of people when they're talking about radical life extension. Maybe they don't always see the connection between the Futurist New Deal, but the Futurist New Deal creates an environment that is conducive to these kind of developments, allows for all American people to be living longer, healthier lives, and that's the thing that we all have to shoot for, and that's the bridge that we can gap in this issue where we have science is ahead of the society in terms of super longevity. And any steps that we can be making, real public policy steps that we can be making, real initiatives that we can be building to move us in that direction. We owe it to ourselves and to our country to do that in a way, maybe in a way that's also entertaining as well. But certainly, any kind of political club or organization is first and foremost a public policy advocacy organization, not so much just for people to get their jollies. So we want to make sure that we present ourselves to the world with this serious face, and I think that the Futurist New Deal is the best way to do that. So please consider the Futurist New Deal as you make these votes in August. Thank you.
Thank you, candidate Ben Zion, and now we will have candidate Holsopple provide his closing remarks for 1 minute.
Yeah, you can tell, I think, that I'm totally committed to this, and I am in the process of building a strong team from the educational sector, and I'll be at universities. I'll be, more importantly, before I get there, the students will know what's going on. So we'll have student groups, we'll have 222 as a global movement building over these next 12 months. And I want to take the Transhumanist Party as a platform along with me that I am the nominee of the Transhumanist Party as I visit these universities. And I'll do the best I can if you vote for me.
Thank you very much, candidate Holsopple. And that concludes the candidates' remarks for the first ever transhumanist virtual debate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I will be sincere with you in terms of my own personal standards and my own expectations. I do wish we could have averted some of the technical difficulties that occurred. Unfortunately, they were a flaw in the YouTube Live platform. We all tried exceptionally hard through multiple attempts to join and find workarounds for those who couldn't join or who had issues. And at the end of the day, we managed 3 hours of excellent substantive discussion where all of our candidates contributed a wealth of ideas, a wealth of proposals, thought-provoking, cutting-edge types of advocacy, and really demonstrating how transhumanists can stand above the two-party system and above the depredations of the political mainstream. Now, is it true that we do not have millions or billions of campaign dollars? Is it true that we do not have tens or hundreds of techs standing by to essentially remedy any issues that might arise from a technical or a logistical standpoint? Yes, we are a young political party. We are a new political party. We are starting out. We are doing our best with our limited resources, but we are also a genuine political party. What you have seen here are the candidates at their sincere, let's say, at a level in which they're not putting on a facade. They are presenting their true selves. They are presenting their true ideas for everyone's consideration. And ultimately, what we need in politics is a bit more genuine, authentic, sincere focus on policy and improving human lives. So I hope that with this debate, you've gotten a glimpse of that. And I will also say we have a great director of media production, Tom Ross, who has mentioned in the
Thank you, Tom.
chat that he will create a highlights reel of all of the candidates' remarks that were the most salient, and also provide a more concise overview of the debate for those of you who couldn't watch the full 3 hours, or for future audiences who might want a more concise digest of this debate. But really, I think this is a very transparent presentation of what the Transhumanist Party is about and what these candidates are about. And we are taking on the American political behemoth, but I think we're doing this armed with the best motives and with the best ideas. So let's see if that old-fashioned but futuristically oriented idealism can ultimately win out and shift the culture in the right direction. So thank you very much, candidates Haywire, Ben Zion, and Holsopple, for joining us today. Thank you to those audience. And we will have another virtual debate on August 3rd. It will be a bit different. We will use a different platform, but we will have these same candidates. We will have more of the same high quality intellectual discourse. So we hope you'll be able to join us then. Until then, thank you very much. And I wish everyone an excellent remainder of your day.
Awesome.
Thank you, Gennady.
Thank you so much.
Hey, Gennady.